Heidi ho, and welcome to the FilmGamer podcast, season 4, episode 3, number 37, Scorched Earth and the War Against Online Bots. Now, I'm going to go through the regular box office report, maybe call a few people out. The main name of the game this week is Inside Out 2, number 1, again, on top with about 100 million. I'm doing this podcast early, so we don't know for sure if it will go over 100 million, but it doesn't really mean a lot in the whole span of things, although, it looks nice as a big round figure. Then I'll go into some news stories I read this week and maybe call out some people. Of course, there's a Donald Sutherland tribute. I'd like to call out um, a guest on a podcast that I listen to, not necessarily a negative thing, but just an observation. I try not to be too negative, and one thing I want to be sure of this time is that I want to be, um, how do I say this? If I call somebody out negatively, I want to bring something in positively, but we'll see how that works because I become overly cynical and pessimistic, when I do a lot of analysis because, it's not as good as yesteryear. Yeah, let's get into it. And then, of course, there's a letterbox report, and I will have a word on House of the Dragon. And this week it's Twitter focused in all categories. So let's get down to it. The box office this weekend was dominated by Inside Out 2, which, as of current estimates, leads with $100 million. Um, Inside Out 2, this appears to be a sequel which isn't like I don't it's less like the Toy Story sequels in that like Toy Story 1, very good movie, Toy Story 2, pretty good movie. Toy Story 3 in terms of I didn't like it as much as everyone else did. I liked it, but it got a Best Picture nomination. It was seen as a gigantic step up, a near perfect film. And Toy Story 4 is almost like a nice coda to that. Um, this is not that type of sequel. It's more in the realm of the also ran of Incredibles 2 or Finding Dory, where it's just kind of like, this is like a nice little revisit to characters that you liked. With that out of the way, this is a 200 million budgeted movie, which has so far made $700 million, well over in 10 days. In 10 days, it has surpassed Dune Part 2 as the highest grossing film of 2024. $700 million in 10 days is something that only like the launch of Grand Theft Auto or Call of Duty could do when people are paying $60 priced US games or $90 Canadian games all at once, and that medium is not limited to its venue. So the fact that people are going out to theaters to see this movie is notable. It made a bit less than Barbie first weekend, and is looking to make a bit more than Barbie this weekend. So Barbie being the last giant film that we got is a noteworthy comparison. But one thing I want to bring up is just that the way that the box office has been reported, and again, Twitter isn't real life, but every once in a while there's like a new, and I don't mean to be disrespectful, I just don't know how else to phrase it, flavor of the month in terms of people who are like the center of reporting on an issue. I wouldn't say that it's viral or anything. And in order to keep being on the ball, you do have to have a little bit of, chutzpah, in terms of like going there and saying something that, resonates with people. Um, the issue I take with Luis Fernando, who's a box office reporter, giving you your full his full due. His name, he is at Louis Fernando J. A cool geek guy who loves box office reports, streaming wars, geek culture, movies, acting, television, investing, and numbers. Haha. Um, this guy, I don't really know how old he is. I believe just, and again, pure speculation, just based on his writing, that he's a little older than me. He seems like about 40 or so. Correct me if I'm wrong, Louise, if you're watching. But that I wouldn't say is terribly relevant. I mean, if he was like a really young guy, then um, he'd have a different point of view. So he he speaks like a guy who has his own voice, which is a good thing. But my main take is that I would put him in a group of people with this one other guy who's like a critic whose name is Scott Mantz. And Scott Mantz is very excitable when he reports on movies and stuff, and he's very loud and brash. Louis, I've never actually heard his own voice because it's all in type, but he's very excitable when it comes to box office reporting. But I find that he's a bit too pro-commerce. I mean, it says right there in the title, he loves investing, so in numbers, ha ha ha. And he says that to his 26,000 followers. He joined Twitter after me, of course, everybody else did, and has been much more effective at it. And he's from London. So again, that's another thing. A couple years ago, I feuded with this guy who was like from London, and really the main feud was a lot of it was culture based because London and Canada don't get movies at the same time. So it's like, oh, my favorite movie of the year is like No Time to Die. And it's like, well, that didn't necessarily come out. That's a bad example because that movie released worldwide at the same time. But it's just like, well, my favorite movie of the year is a movie that came out in my country, but not your country, came out months later or months earlier and stuff like that. So I just think when things hit at different times, people have different responses to those sorts of things. So anyway, um, my main issue with his reporting is that I find that he drinks the Kool-Aid. Um, he has his own voice, but he kind of uses it to pump up big movies. And the thing about big movies is that they're so big, they're owned by big corporations, a lot of investors included. And again, I'm not an anti-business person. I'm a very pro-business person. Um, the issue that I have with Inside Out's reporting is that it's made by Pixar, which was bought out by Disney in 2006, and it's their first hit since Disney torpedoed their business model in 2019. Toy Story 4 comes out, makes $1 billion, is a successful film. It kind of shows the roof of that franchise's appeal because it only makes a little bit more than Toy Story 3, despite like a much wider berth and a much more planned release strategy. But it does well. And then COVID happens, and COVID happens right as Onward comes out. A few weeks later, they release Onward. Um, and Onward was one of those movies like The Invisible Man and The Way Back and a couple of other movies that The Hunt being another one, um, Birds of Prey, and if you want to go back a bit further, you can also say Sonic and Bad Boys for Life, which is the third Bad Boys movie. They all came out around the time that COVID was happening. So Onward was like the number one movie the weekend before everything closed. It opened to about 38 million. And then COVID happened, shut everything down, and theaters were sort of the last thing to shut down. It was a question of can they kind of hang on because people can still go to the movies on their own and whatnot. And it was when I was thinking the last day before theaters closed, did I want to go, and I was working at Staples at the time. Do I want to go to the movies, before everything closes down, and see The Way Back? Decent film, not really worth seeing in theaters, but decent, drama to watch on TV. And I remember when the theaters closed, I was like, oh, That's like my third place, the place you have home, you have work, and then you have your third place that you go to. That's sort of like your own space or a communal space, but is sort of like a place where you can be yourself, but away from people. Where you, in some cases, get away from yourself, and that was my space for the movies. So when COVID closed it down, it's like, oh, this really isn't safe. This is a serious thing. So Onward hit pretty hard in that regard, and because of that, theaters shut down. Disney is like, what do we do? They decide to release it on Disney Plus. And then Pixar, as they did for their next few movies, and a few Disney movies as well, decided to release their movies on Disney Plus. And it was very good, I guess, in a way for Disney Plus, but it was extremely brand damaging because that basically taught the audience of like, wait for Disney Plus. Because if you wait for Disney Plus, then you'll be able to, um, you know, see it for the price you're already paying in a subscription. So Soul comes out um, later on that year because they were doing two movies a year at that point. I don't like Soul very much. I wrote a pretty negative review on FilmGamer.com that you can read. I just, I like the compositions, but I didn't find that it was very it was basically to me like it was Inside Out, but for music and black people. Like, instead of Amy Poehler, you had Tina Fey. Um, and instead of traveling inside the mind, they're inside souls or whatever. It was just, it felt very formulaic to me. But that came out on Disney Plus on Christmas Day, and it won an Oscar. It won an Oscar for John Uh, Batiste, sorry, and Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross won their second Oscar. They previously won for The Social Network score. Um, but other than that, it reviewed well, but it went straight to Disney Plus. And then the next year is the one Pixar movie I've actually yet to see, aside from Inside Out 2, and that was Luca. And Luca came out in the middle of June, did well on Disney Plus, and then we're 2 years removed from the pandemic. And this is where, under the CEO leadership, the brief leadership of Bob Chapek, they decide to release Turning Red um, on Disney Plus still. And this is 2 years removed from the pandemic. This is just a few months before Top Gun Maverick opens and brings people back. And there was a question of, this is a very well reviewed movie. It was Turning Red. Um, one of the movies that, one of my favorite movies of its year, and one of the few Pixar movies that, like, I used to like everything they did up until, the Wall-E minus Cars. But after that, they did Cars 2 and stuff, and I saw Cars 2 later and liked it. But their Pixar, I find, is a bit more hit and miss. And there's been a larger discussion in the film community of, has Illumination, the makers of Despicable Me, overtaken Pixar in terms of popularity. And that is a relevant question because Super Mario Brothers movie comes out, makes a lot of money. The Minions movie, Secret Life of Pets, uh, funny animation and stuff that people go see their movies, and they're made much cheaper. They're much more profitable. Is this the way? Has Pixar lost it? I never thought that they lost it. Um, because I'm not stupid. They make good movies, and they take real swings, and they do a lot of original movies. Of course, in the last decade, of course, they've doubled down a bit more on sequels because when you make a great movie like Finding Nemo, people want to see more. When you make a great movie like Incredibles, people want to see more. When you make a great movie like Monsters Inc., people want to see more. And then when you sell a whole bunch of merchandise with cars, the company wants to make more. And that's why we got three Cars movies, because the merchandise that Disney, and you got to remember that Disney is actually foremost a merchandise company. You go to their movie theaters. Oh, I love those characters. Let me buy the stuffed animals for my kid. Let me buy the toys. Let me buy the tie-ins. You go to the Disney park, you know, where are you buying? You're buying at the gift shop. That honestly, even though it kind of seems flimsy, because there are Disney stores around. That is the entire model of what Disney is built on. We are dream weavers or Imagineers, as they're called, and they'll sell you a stuffed animal. It's kind of a really funny business model. Of course, they make huge amounts of revenue, like I just mentioned the 700 million that they made this week. But their main bottom line is merchandise. And that's why the Cars movies got sequels. So Turning Red comes out, and it comes out in a weekend after the Batman. And Uncharted has been number one for 2 weeks, made 45 to 50 million. The Batman, the week before, opened 134 million, which is how much Pirates of the Caribbean 2 did. So again, people are like, okay, this is like a good amount of money. And then we have nothing. March 11th, nothing. March 18th, nothing. You get some small, like The Outfit, which has done well on streaming this past year, X, which I liked, but those are independent films foremost. And then you got, anime, Jutsu, Kaisen Zero by Crunchyroll, which is a division of Sony. They do well. But there's room for more, and they are still releasing on Disney Plus. So like 2 weeks go by of nothing, and then of course The Lost City comes out and does well. But it was clearly a mistake that they should have released it then, and it's just Bob Chapek didn't have the foresight to do that. I don't know if Bob Iger would have done the same. But anyways, Turning Red is very good. It comes out, um, and it also takes place in Toronto. Shout out to Toronto. Has a decent soundtrack to it. Um, it does good for like viewership and stuff. It was the most viewed ever Disney Plus original title at the time. 1.7 billion minutes. And it had critical acclaim. Even though it has a bit of an interesting, it's partially out there, but then partially formulaic coming of age type stuff. But in terms of accolades, it was nominated for Best Animated Feature. Um, I'm not sure what it lost to offhand. I would imagine Spider-Verse. If I can check here, um, let me check and see what it lost to. It's funny, that was the year that Everything Everywhere All at Once won. Um, so the best animated movie was, if I can find it, they organized this in no order. Um, Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio, a movie which I cannot stand. Stop motion animated, my least favorite type of stop motion animation because it's so hard. Like that's the whole thing, is that it's claymation and they take a photograph, bend an arm, take a photograph, bend an arm, and they're made of Play-Doh and sticks. And yeah, the other nominees that year were Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, decent movie. The Sea Beast, which I fell asleep to because I was really tired that day looking after my nephew, but my nephew's seen it a bunch of times. Marcel the Shell with Shoes On, which I remember watching the trailer for that. It's based on like a YouTube series or something like that. And I remember crying with like emotion at the, you know, grab that watching the trailer did, because it's just like a shell that wants to meet its family. It's like, am I alone in this world? I don't know. But they gave it to Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio because it's about fascism or something. Anyway, what is the deal with that stop motion animation style? It's like, let's do it animated, but let's have less frames and let's have it be a juddery mess. Hate it. Hate it. Hate it. Um, there's a new Xbox game coming out that uses that stop motion kind of style of animation. And they're a Canadian game developer, Compulsion Games. It's called South of Midnight. It's in production, comes out next year. Um, but it does the stop motion during cutscenes, and then when you're playing the game, it's 30. So I think it's stupid. But I also thought their last game, We Happy Few, was stupid. because it never worked and it was horribly released, and then it was horribly released, and for whatever reason, Microsoft decided to buy it, which is a mystery to me. Man, and that must have been a hell of a pitch. But I digress. Anyways, so Pixar comes out with Turning Red, a lot of critical acclaim. And then they're like, did we make a mistake? Yes, they did. Um, their next movie, their first proper return to theaters, is Lightyear. A movie which, when you're making a movie that's like inspired by Buzz Lightyear, and this is the weird thing that you're inspired by a fictional character, uh, voiced by Tim Allen, and you're known for being voiced by Tim Allen, and then you make him voiced by Chris Evans because it's sort of a prequel, but not really a prequel. The opening of Lightyear says, like, when Andy was 8, he saw, you know, a movie at the theaters, and he made Buzz Lightyear his favorite toy. This is the movie he saw. And it's a terrible movie. The director of Lightyear has since been fired from Pixar, Angus MacLean, um, even though he had a pretty good, um, I would say, like, he co-directed Finding Dory. He was kind of on the way uh, up. Um, anyway, but um, restructuring and whatnot, um, he was included among the 75 Pixar employees laid off by the Walt Disney Company as part of an ongoing company-wide restructuring. Um, yeah, that's a bummer. Um, he was also the creator of, partial creator of Buzz Lightyear of Star Command, a TV series that I watched as a kid, and I watched the movie too. Um, and so it's odd to me that like Lightyear kind of follows none of that. Um, yeah, and it's kind of a cheap movie because it's like, oh, Buzz is his own villain kind of thing, and it's, you know, it got a lot of flack. This is interesting. Lightyear got a lot of flack for being like woke because I believe Kiki Palmer in it, is a black character. Yeah. And it another character who is her mother or grandmother is gay. Um, and so, people like really noticed that. Online trolls really honed in on that during the marketing of the movie, and were like, "This movie is woke. I'm not seeing it because it's woke." And I find in the movie, it's one of like the wokeness, to speak about it, is one of the few things that's like remotely interesting about this overall bland movie. Which is so bland it takes out Tim Allen, and that was another thing that contributed to its wokeness of like, oh, you know, Tim Allen is a Republican. They fired him and got Chris Evans. And it's kind of funny because it damages Chris Evans' career a bit. Like, Chris Evans hasn't been in very many theatrical movies. He was in Ghosted, an Apple original movie, and Pain Hustlers, a Netflix original movie. Neither are particularly well-crafted films, but Chris Evans has never really been in that many well-crafted films. He's kind of in the company of Ryan Reynolds in that regard of just like making movies for the people, only not really working with a lot of directors who are, shall we say, auteurs who, you know, have their own creative ideas about how they want to make a movie. They usually work with people who are like, oh, let's entertain the masses, like warm up acts almost. And then occasionally you get really good warm up acts, like, the director of the upcoming Deadpool 3, Sean Levy, who is Canadian, by the way. Um, anyway, that movie poised to break records, by the way, Deadpool and Wolverine. But anyways, Lightyear has come out painted as woke. Critics don't really like it. I watch it. It's a very boring movie. I struggled to get through with it. And it's kind of a movie that no one at Pixar really wanted to make, but they kind of went on with it. And it was very expensive, cost over like $200 million. And it didn't do well. It lost uh, Disney Pixar a lot of money, and as a result, the director was fired from the company along with 74 other people. So they're kind of on the ropes. And then they come out with Elemental, which I saw last year and took my nephew to see, which was a good memory of mine. Even though the movie itself isn't like amazing or anything, it's pretty rudimentary. It oddly felt more like a movie geared towards my generation because it's like the people who do the voices for Fire and Water in that movie are around my age, and it's just about, you know, people learning to live with their differences and coexist. And it's very pat, very formulaic, but at times beautiful, even though the flame animation, they didn't get that right. But that movie opens the same weekend. This is a year ago now that we're up to that. The Flash opened. The Flash opens to 55 million, Elemental opens to 29 million. And keep in mind that Pixar, by this point, hasn't marketed a movie, and Disney themselves has not marketed a successful film in theaters that's original. Um, like, that's not a sequel in a long time. And Elemental is their first movie to do that. Like, Elemental after the COVID and whatnot in particular, or even in the last 10 years, like think of an original Disney movie in the last 10 years that's not based on something. Their most successful movie is Jungle Cruise in that regard, and that's like again based on a ride, and it's not particularly great, it's okay. But Disney has had a lot of trouble in the last 10 years launching new franchises. And as a result, you know, Inside Out 2 comes out, breaks all the records, and it's like, ah, great, you know, but it's a sequel. Next year, they have a movie coming out, which was supposed to come out in March, but got delayed because they wanted to focus on Inside Out 2 because they knew how important it was, and it's clearly paid off. Um, Elio, and it's about a boy who has a disability, has one eye. I'm not sure how we'll see in the movie, but basically, his mother works for the military, makes contact with aliens, and as if it's like the interdimensional phone call of ET, the boy Elio picks up, and they believe he's the leader, and he has to explain to these race of aliens who are thinking about annihilating humanity why they shouldn't, and he has to teach them about them. But it's told through the eyes of a boy, so it's kind of like an interesting idea they have going on there. I'm willing to watch it as I do all Pixar films, and yeah. Um, so if I can go back here, because I want to go back to the Pixar movies and find out more about Elio. Is it gonna let me? Da, 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 da. So many subclasses on Wikipedia. If you go to Wikipedia and you click on the first link, the first blue link on every single article, and you keep clicking and clicking and clicking and clicking, you know where it'll eventually take you? Philosophy. If you click on the first blue link on any article and just keep clicking and clicking, it all comes back to philosophy, which is kind of a funny thing, I guess. Um, okay, is this going to tell me when the. Oh, no, it's not. Okay. So, filmography, list of Pixar films. You always have to go to the list to see what the heck is going on. Upcoming, Elio, directed and written by Adrian Molina. That's very cool. I wonder if he's related to Alfred Molina, who, by the way, is married to um, the uh, co-writer of Frozen, who's the current chief creative officer of Disney. And her name is Jennifer Lee. I hate how, again, I can remember people's first names of like celebrities and authors and stuff, but I can't remember people's names like that in real life. Um, anyway, uh, so Adrian Molina, Cal Arts grad, was a co-director on Coco and a writer, so this is his crack at it. as a member of Pixar's senior creative brain trust. Good luck, Adrian. Um, and again, we're getting close to people who are my age, still a ways off. This guy's a millennial, but born in 85. Um, I gotta get moving with my life. That's what I gotta do. So, my question here, and you can kind of look at it in terms of the overall industry or personally or for Disney themselves, but my question is this. Will the success, the mega success of Inside Out 2 change anything about the industry? I don't think so. It's a sequel. Um, so going by just reviews, it's a good, not great movie. Um, it's doing well, really well. It'll make a lot of money for the executives at Disney. That the people who actually worked on the film won't get paid much for. Um, how is that necessarily great for anyone? Like, it's not like imagine if the number three film, The Bike Riders, which was a movie that New Regency made, and they had a deal with Disney, so they were releasing it through Searchlight, their indie label, and then the actor strike happens, it gets delayed, um, and then they try and they let go of it, basically, Searchlight, and Focus Features buys it, and they decide to release it in the middle of the summer. It's a movie about a motorcycle gang. It stars Austin Butler, who played Elvis, and Jodie Comer, who was in Free Guy in the Last Duel, and Killing Eve, which she won an Emmy for most famously. Um, it also stars Tom Hardy, and he's doing a voice. Tom Hardy being Tom Hardy. I haven't actually seen him in a non-Venom role in quite a while. Um, but anyways, it's basically about the formation or living of a motorcycle gang right before they got violent. And it's directed by Jeff Nichols, who directed a movie that's interesting exercise. I might have mentioned it before, Midnight Special, about a boy who's basically like, imagine if you combined E.T. and Elliot in E.T. into one thing. And it's about a little boy who's like 8 years old, who also has superpowers and is on the run from the government, and his dad and his uncle, played by Michael Shannon and Adam Driver, who try and deliver him to safety. Or maybe, no, it's not. It's Joel Edgerton, actually. I'm confusing that um, because Jeff Nichols' previous film, Take Shelter, which I really recommend, starred Michael Shannon. No, I'm right. It's Michael Shannon. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. So Michael Shannon, Joel Edgerton, and Adam Driver are all in it. Um, right. Adam Driver is the like FBI agent who's just kind of who's the audience's avatar, basically. But it's kind of fascinating role in this movie as like the third man, like in movie where it's like about a guy on the run. There's always like they call it like the deuteragonist or whatever, the secondary protagonist or whatever. They're kind of in their own movie, their own narrative, like Tommy Lee Jones basically reinvented this role or invented it, where it's just kind of like they're the antagonist, but they're also putting together their own version of the story. They don't have all the facts and stuff, and they're representing the authority who is supposed to be a force of good and that can be corruptible or whatever, but they most of the time have to be a pretty good person. So the disappointing ending to this in most media is like the FBI agent gets within gunpoint of the protagonist and like lets them go or has a moment of understanding and stuff. Very cheap stuff. But anyways, the interesting thing about Midnight Special is there's like no exposition in this movie. Everything is delivered visually. Nobody's like, remember that thing, or in a Christopher Nolan film, Inception, where they're explaining all the rules of the dream. None of that happens in Midnight Special. So it's like interesting in that regard. That's all I can say about this movie is that it's interesting because there's not much to go on. It's just like, well, it's interesting that somebody like wrote and thought up this movie, and that's Jeff Nichols who made The Bike Riders. And this week on Twitter, people were saying Jeff Nichols, the most 3.5 star film director of all time. And people were like, so is that a bad thing? We need 3.5 star out of five movies. They're what makes the world go round. And it was just kind of like the same argument I've heard about Taylor Swift, where people are like, you know, they make good, not great stuff. And maybe they have them in them to make something great, but they never will. They'll just be consistently good forever. And I kind of have no problem with that because in order to be great, you kind of got to take a step back, charge up your batteries, run and jump and leap. And sometimes you miss. And people aren't comfortable with missing. They're like, let me just be good. You know, it's like when you learn something and you're pretty bad at it and then you're good at it. And then you want to do the easy stuff because it's good and it makes you feel good. There's not really anything wrong with that, really. Um, so, uh, back to my question. If the Bike Riders was a hit and that was number one at the box office, I feel that would change something because then people would be like, oh, we need more of this. We need more original movies. Now, Hollywood wouldn't get that memo. They would be like, oh, well, we need more movies about bike riders. Disney the next day greenlights Wild Hogs 2. You know, that's honestly what would happen. Um, but and then Jeff Nichols would get called for like a superhero adaptation or a franchise film or something like that. And he'd get his pick of projects. Um, and he'd probably be picked by Disney to do like Lion King 3 or something like that. But if that movie was number one, that would change something. A sequel being number one doesn't change anything. Number two is also a sequel, Bad Boys Ride or Die, 18 million, 146 overall. It has made more than Bad Boys 2. It will not make more than Bad Boys 3. It's already tracking behind that. But yeah, um, good, good for it. I guess overall it is making 289, closing on 300 mil. It cost 100. Profit deal, yay. Number four, Garfield movie. The third Garfield movie, although not related to the first two, which were live action. 85 million overall. 230 million worldwide, cost about 60. Profit deal. There you go. Number five, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. This has been 7 weeks at the box office. I'm looking forward to seeing it. Probably around mid-July on Disney Plus, I'm guessing, because that's when the version of the movie which cuts out all of the CGI and you just see people acting in mocap suits and you can watch the whole movie like that. That's coming out to watch on 12th. It'll be a version of the movie that you can see. Um, and it's made about 3 million. It's approaching, it's within 8 million, or it might be 14 actually, of it's within spitting distance of Rise of the Planet of the Apes, of matching that domestically. And this is now the summer season, so most people are out, and that means that weekdays play like weekends. So this could realistically, outpace that maybe, and it'll be a hit. It recently covered its huge budget, 160 million. People were trying to act like that's modest because that's less than the insanely expensive previous films, but it covered 160 million, which is a lot of money domestically. It has made like still like 100 million less than the previous Apes movies, so it's a definite like step down. But at this point, it's enough that like we'll make a sequel down the road eventually. Um, Maybe that's similar to Uncharted. Or maybe they just have a hard time making sequels to movies about treasure hunting. Like, we haven't gotten National Treasure 3 after all these years, and National Treasure 2 was like a big hit despite not being a very good movie. Now, I know none of the National Treasure movies review very well. We did get a TV series. But National Treasure Book of Secrets, and this is the one where Nicolas Cage utters the line, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna kidnap the President of the United States. Um, it cost 130 million, made 460 million. Um, Treasure hunting movies, I guess, are hard. I guess they're hard to do. Um, anyway, yeah, I was disappointed in National Treasure 2. What can I say? I was also disappointed in the TV series, which um, basically treats the it's written by the film writers, so it's like they know what they're doing, but they like treat the movies like they're a Bible, and it's like very sacred lore and mythos, and it's like, come on, like these are treasure hunting movies. Let's have a sense of humor here. But nonetheless, there hasn't been a third National Treasure, and we all want one. Um, so, anyways, um, it's Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes has made enough money to, at some point, uh, for them to make a sequel. However many years later, we'll see. But like Uncharted made 400 million, cost 120, good amount of money for them to be like, okay, we'll make a sequel, but not enough of like, we need to make our profits grow. This sequel is happening tomorrow, which you'll see sometimes for movies. Like Bad Boys 3 was like that, where it made an insane amount of money, and then that weekend Sony made a call and they're like, and Bad Boys 4 is happening. And of course the Will Smith slap happened, but that was like a the weekend after Bad Boys 3 came out, people were like, yeah, we're making another one, you know. And Toy Story 5, it's like we need to grow profits. Toy Story 5 is happening. Forget the fact that 3 and 4 both ended perfectly, and there doesn't seem like there's very many stories to tell. A fourth one is happening because money. Jurassic World Dominion comes out, kind of closes the books as much as they can, but they're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. You know, these movies still make $1 billion, and Jurassic World Dominion was terrible, but let's not throw this away. There's still money to be made here. So, they're rushing for um, Jurassic World, which doesn't have a title yet, the Jurassic World sequel. They've cast it, but like they are sprinting to make it happen, Universal, so that, they can have a Jurassic World movie and justify their massive expenses. Um, Jurassic World 4 coming out next year, starring Scarlett Johansson, Mahershala Ali, and they have the writer of the first two and the director of Rogue One, Gareth Edwards, and Monsters, and the creator, which wasn't very good, but it looked good. So, I mean, I'm optimistic. I mean, Jurassic World Dominion still had decent special effects and was a terrible movie. But I found that it wasn't as visually advanced as Fallen Kingdom was, which Juan Antonio Bayona directed. So I mean that's something. Like I've given up on these movies being good, and Amblin Entertainment, Spielberg's company, which also makes Twisters. The special effects for that don't look very good. They're too theme park ride, and of course, Universal Pictures Orlando. Most the Twister ride is a theme park ride, and a lot of stuff that they make. Jurassic Park itself. Theme park rides. It's what they specialize in. So you can't really blame them, I guess, from an economics perspective for making these movies, which are theme park rides. But at the same time, it doesn't make for a good movie. But nonetheless, that won't stop Universal. They are on the fast track to get this movie out for a year from now. So yeah, principal photography started um, 2 weeks ago in Thailand. They're gonna film for a month there, um, and going to a lot of places which I don't know the name of. Trang, Krabi, um, Phang Nga. Uh, filming will take place uh, from July to September, uh, and at Malta Film Studios in Malta, and then move to London in United Kingdom. And filming will wrap on October 18th. Now we're talking about rendering special effects of 4K images here, and that sometimes on the Apes films takes 2 years. So they'll probably master it down in 2K and whatnot. But that means that in order to make their release date, which again is less than a year from now, and they're just starting filming, Movies of a reasonable size take a year and a half to make. Movies of this size take 2 years to make, and they're kind of starting now. They're not behind the ball, but they're in the position of like War of the Worlds, where it's like, okay, it's not rushed. We're prepared. We can make it, but we're also kind of under the gun. It's kind of like a movie Eli Roth made was Thanksgiving, and he basically had to leave Borderlands to do it. Of like, this is my dream project. Borderlands is kind of a for hire gig for me. If you give me the green light on this, I can leave this project handed over to Tim Miller, who directed Deadpool, and would probably, we'll see, be better on the comedic front than Eli Roth would be. He has a dark sense of humor, which fits Borderlands, but like, it's not, they're not making Citizen Kane or anything. But he's like, I can deliver this movie within 6 months and, using all the skills. Like, so you have professional people working on a movie, and when Universal wants to move mountains, they will, because it affects their bottom line. They need a big, like, guaranteed billion-dollar grosser so that investors will go, good, So every few years they need a Jurassic World and they need a Fast and Furious movie. And it's kind of getting interesting because this is Jurassic World 4, Jurassic Park 7. This is going to be like a second reboot or a soft reboot. Like, can they keep people interested? Can they keep going? Because diminishing returns are kicking in. The last Jurassic World was terrible. People know that. Um, the only reason people were interested in the last one was all of the, uh, old gang was back. They can't pull that trick again. And then, the reboot that happened in 2015, I think, with Chris Pratt, that was like, the nostalgia play was a huge effect on that. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I'm just fascinated when movies like this is a movie where it's like, okay, we're one of the biggest movie studios in the world. All gates are open, all lights are on. We are working uh, for 24/7 around the clock. We never close, open 7 days a week, to get this movie done. So, yeah, a movie is coming out a year from now, and they just started filming last week. Can they get there on time? Is the question. I think they can. And, Spielberg production companies usually run a pretty good ship. He's a pretty good producer, and he likes making money. So, yeah. So, yeah. Uh, Number 6 is If, the Imaginary Friend movie. It is down surprisingly only a little. It took a big tumble last week because Inside Out 2 opened. It's hung around. It's still in about 2,500 theaters. Again, it's only made 2 million, so maybe it'll get to 110 million. But again, it's the summer, so maybe 115. It'll cover its budget domestically, which is always a good sign. And it's an original movie that's now made over $100 million. So if we look at the yearly box office, uh, here we have last year. I'm trying to think what's the last original movie not based on anything to make over 100 million. Like Barbie was based on a toy and whatnot. Um, Wonka based on the books. The Sound of Freedom was the last movie to make over 100 million that wasn't based on anything. Taylor Swift, that's a concert movie based on the known property of Taylor Swift. Elemental, based on the brand of Pixar. Five Nights at Freddy's, based on a game. Migration, but from the makers of Despicable Me. So it's like brand association. Um, that's to give you an idea of how much of an anomaly Sound of Freedom was in its success. That it like was it in the last year like one of the only movies where it's like captured a zeitgeist and people were like, have you seen this movie, Sound of Freedom? And I watched it. I was terribly bored by it. because I imagined a much cooler movie that like somebody managed to make, and the direction of it was good. It's just the story was just like this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens, and none of it is like super exciting, but it's like subject matter is in the right place and its intentions are fine, and the acting is all right. It's just yeah. But that was like the last zeitgeist movie that like was something new. Like Elvis is based on Elvis. Elvis sells a lot of merchandise. Nope is based on, Jordan Peele doing his like original thing. Same with like Oppenheimer. That's sold on Christopher Nolan. Like Smile before that is the last like original movie that was like, I mean, yeah, it's based on a short film, but it's like this came out of nowhere. And, The Lost City was another one. And right now, those made both 105. Bullet Train was based on a comic book, made 103. So I would say that for an original movie, it's done pretty well. Like it's not Sound of Freedom, but it's doing okay. It just cost 110 million, but it will break even. And I wouldn't say Louise is negative, but it's like when anybody tweets a lot because you want to tweet a lot when you become famous and stuff like that. When he reports on Inside Out, he's like, Pixar feeling like making history at the box office as Inside 2 grossed a groundbreaking 30 million. And then he's like, second biggest, second Friday of all time for animation. And it's like he mentions all of these records, and then, I as I like to do, just kind of spoil it because like he mentions number two biggest this, number two biggest that, and I just like burst the balloon and I'm like, this movie broke records for Turkey, Colombia, and Paraguay. The rest of them aren't records. If you're opening two behind Incredibles 2, which is the previous big Pixar opener, which opened less than, and other animated movies like the Super Mario Brothers movie, that's not a record. That's second place. Like, there's no new ground being broken here. Like, but he's acting like it's like, oh, it's historic. And it's like, yeah, it's historic if you, only count from the last 4 years and, you know, second place. How historic. It's like, well, it's big for Pixar, and it's like, yeah, yeah, but it's not as big as Incredibles 2. It's like, but it's the biggest in the last 4 years. It's like, yeah, because they haven't released movies in the last 4 years. They released a flop Lightyear, and then they released Elemental, which was a creeping sleeper hit. But like again, there's no history being made here, people like positive stuff, so they like people shouting from the rooftops. It's like, oh, every year we're breaking new records. Every year there's progress, but to me, there's no progress. There's like and that damper attitude doesn't impress people. People don't like to say that, and it's kind of interesting to me because Louis was also talking about the Fall Guy, and he was talking about how good it's holding, and it's still in the top 10 after all these weekends and stuff like that. Um, but it's still lost a lot of money, and it will be nowhere near profitable. Now, he doesn't like necessarily indicate that and go long, and he chooses to cover the Fall Guy, which is the indication that he gives that he favors the Fall Guy. But so that's where I come in and I'm kind of like, hold on, like, can't do this. And then, and with If, that wasn't Louis, that was Exhibitor Relations Company, another box office analysis thing. And the issue I have with these people who write very engaging, it's just that they're company men. Like, they don't think for themselves. There's no individual thought here. I come from the critic world where I'm just kind of like, show me your thoughts. Tell me what you're thinking. Don't just parrot press releases. And so we find that's what Louise does. That's what Exhibitor Relations Company do. I don't find their analysis particularly bold or interesting. And it's just all these people who, particularly online, have these ideas of being like, IP. What's IP? Intellectual property. So it's like, IP is the best. It's like, yeah, so you're championing something that's already made over something that's like original and then later on becomes a franchise. It's just like dumb because it's like an unsustainable business model. Like not everything can be IP. Something has to be created first. So I find it kind of like them to be sycophants. Um, and I'll stand by that. Like, you can throw that in my face later. Um, just a self-seeking flatterer, according to Merriam-Webster's dictionary. I'm just trying to make sure that I'm using it right. Um, Taken from the word psychon, meaning fig, and feignen, meaning to show or reveal. Uh, and it's about like slandering and stuff like that. Well, that's all very fascinating. Anyway, when I think of sycophants, I think of two things. I think of Bruce Wayne's fake drunk scene in Batman Begins, where Christian Bale has to clear out his billionaire party, because Ra's al Ghul, Liam Neeson, is there. Spoiler alert. And he has to like get everybody out before they burn down the house. So he calls them all sycophant suck ups, and they're all just whenever money's around, people like to hang around in a group or a posse thinking that they'll get some, even though they don't contribute nothing themselves. And that's low key, or I guess high key now that I'm saying it out loud. What I think of a lot of people who report on the box office now. Very little thoughtful analysis. One guy who I like, I'll shout out people I like, Bill Brasky, on Twitter. Older gentleman, his avatar is a Simpsons character or profile picture of himself. I think it's a Simpsonification of himself. And he has interesting thoughts. Jesse Hassinger, as well, Rock Marooned, at Rock Marooned on Twitter, has good individual thoughts and analysis of like, I think this, rather than like, here's a press release I read. Look how well we're doing. It's like, okay, I get it. You read the investor letter, but what do you think as a person? And then usually when you corner these people of like, hey, what do you actually think of the shitty film you're reporting on? They'll back up and they'll be like, oh, well, it's not my place to report on how good a movie is. And it's like, okay, but you're saying you're a reporter and you can't report your own opinion. And it's just kind of funny because like they pick and choose. And it's like you corner these people. I'm like, can you actually say what you think of something rather than just like saying something that Chat GPT could tell me? And they're like, no. It's like Roger Ebert talked about the people of like, we review films when we get them. We don't go to free screenings because that violates like an ancient code that critics have to be fair. If you're accepting gifts, then you can't be impartial to a movie. So you get all these quotes of like, well, other critics have said it's the best of the year. It's like, yeah, that's the quote that they gave on the way to this free buffet. You know, you can't trust that. You have to trust the real criticism. So I just find that there are a lot of fakes. And that bothers me because it's like, get real. What what is changing about our industry? It's shifting beneath our feet. One positive thing that I've found is that with the number 7 and 8 movie, number 7 is The Exorcism, a movie by Vertical Entertainment, who's like, you would say, a major mini. Vertical Entertainment has been around for quite a while, and they release a lot of like sort of straight to video movies. But they're releasing a movie in over 1,000 theaters, The Exorcism, which is benefiting or trying to benefit from the Pope's Exorcist, the Russell Crowe movie, because this is also a Russell Crowe movie about an exorcism, but he's playing an actor who, um, is working through some things on a film set and about an exorcism movie. And it's kind of like meta and stuff. And somebody on Facebook, Jess Dwyer, who I collaborated with at Joe Blow, was like, "Yeah, I wonder if Russell Crowe was going through something at the time that he's doing these exorcism films, which are unrelated." but this one tries to benefit from its association with The Pope's Exorcist being like a little hit. Um, that will get a sequel, by the way. But it opens in over 2,000 theaters. Um, any movie that opens in over 1,000 theaters is considered a wide release. I think even in some cases over 500. But like these distributors, these experienced indie film distributors who have been around the block enough times that they're like, we can go big on this film. We can push a film out, even if we don't put down a lot of like advertising space for it. There's walk up business. There are people who, and this is astonishing to me, who will just like go to the theater, don't know what they're going to see. They see the title or something, they're like, oh, I'll go see that. Or a friend does it. I envy that. I could never do it in my life. Maybe one day I will, but that would involve me not knowing about what movies are playing in theaters, and that's, my whole personality. So good luck with that. Number 8 is Thelma. This movie played at Sundance, really well reviewed. It's about an old lady played by June Squibb, Academy Award nominee, who gets scammed, similar to the Beekeeper, and goes after the scammer. But there's no Jason Statham. It's just her and Louis Gossett Jr. Rest in peace. And it's like a comedy and particularly well reviewed on Rotten Tomatoes. It's well reviewed on Rotten Tomatoes. Let me just see here, uh, just because I knew it was so high, and I wanted to get it exact because it's 99% on Rotten Tomatoes, which is kind of ridiculous. Like, because you just need to give something, I think, over a 5.5 or maybe a 6 out of 10 to get a positive review. And it has an 81% audience score, which seems honestly like it's um, harder to get. Inspired by the real life experience of director Josh Margolin's own grandmother, Thelma puts a clever spin on movies like Mission Impossible, shining the spotlight on an elderly grandmother as an unlikely action hero. With infectious humor, Margolin implies the familiar tropes of the action genre in hilarious, age appropriate ways to tackle aging with agency. In the first reading role of her 70-year career, June Squibb portrays the strong willed Thelma with grit and determination, demonstrating that she is more than capable of taking care of business, despite what her daughter Gail, played by Parker Posey, and son in law Alan Clark Gregg, or grandson Danny, might believe. The critics' consensus: a stellar showcase for the talented June Squibb. Thelma avoids cheap laughs as it finds the lighter side of some serious issues. Smells like a sleeper hit. Now, if I get more critical, as I always like to do, and go to Metacritic, which is much more specific, Thelma is rated 79, which is generally favorable reviews. So, yeah, pretty good. If I'm choosing the negative, like, because let me set expectations there. There are no negative reviews of this movie. That is movies that are below, I think it's 35. Um, so there's nobody who hated the movie. The most mixed review comes from, I'm guessing, is it going to be Variety, which is owned by Variety and the New York Times. Um, uh, Thelma may bill itself as an unconventional action movie, but it's more of a sitcom, really. People have made that, you know, um, criticism about movies before. Star Trek Beyond is basically an episode of television. So it's not very cinematic, is basically what Peter De Bruges is saying. And then the New York Times review refers to the writer-director. Margolin's empathy for Thelma, yeah, lends the film a sweetness and occasional poignancy that help mitigate much of the foolishness. So they weren't on board really with the premise or the way it goes about its premise. I'm looking forward to seeing this movie because people raved about it. And, a lot of times it can just be whatever. But Leonard Maltin, he's been around the block. He's one of the oldest critics around that people know. And he says if it weren't for casting a bona fide nonagenarian, so 90 something year old, in the title role, Thelma might not work at all. but it doesn't pander to its audience and treats its characters with dignity and a dash of comic exaggeration. Positive review. So that's good. This seems like a movie worth watching. I'm looking forward to it. Be anxious to see how it does next weekend then. So that was number 8. Again, they had 2 million apiece. Um, except it's interesting here. I wonder about ticket prices because now they do surge pricing where expensive movies are more expensive and then movies that open number 2 are less expensive. Like I'd go see The Bike Riders if it costs $6, but it costs the same as much as, Inside Out and Bad Boys. Uh, I'm not paying full price for a movie that, I can wait to rent. That feels like a movie I'd wait to rent. But um, nonetheless, Thelma opening in 1,300 theaters by Magnolia Pictures, another major mini distributor who's been around the block and is like, okay, well, the biggest new movie this weekend, like Focus Features, again, they're owned by Universal Pictures or a division of Comcast, but they're their indie label. So, like, Focus Features, Vertical Entertainment, Magnolia, even Trafalgar Releasing, who released at number 10 a movie called Ghost Right Here, Right Now, which combining live performance from Ghost's sold out Kia Forum shows in LA with a narrative story that picks up plot threads from the band's long running webisode series. Good for them. Like, I love seeing movies in the top 10 that I've never heard about. I thought that would be an interesting part of reviewing the box office during COVID, but there literally came nothing out and there wasn't much to see. And I didn't have that blog then. So, maybe I'll go back someday and do the lost box office of, the COVID era of 2020 and 2021 and review movies like Relic then. But, anyways, that's the top 10. Number 9 is Watchers. It dropped relatively steadily. It's a flop. It cost 30 million. It's made 17. So there's not a lot to ride home about. And the number one movie made 100 million. Overall, it's made about 100. The top 10's made about 150. So you have 33% of the box office shared by 9 films. That's not healthy to me. But, people like Louise see dollar signs and they're like, oh, salvation for the industry. And I go, well, when it's just shared among one movie that's a sequel, all the same people are getting paid. Nothing is changing. So next weekend, the big opener is A Quiet Place Day 1, which is scheduled to do about 40 million. And I'll get into the news story that I read this week on that in a second. But that's the big movie opening that weekend, and there are questions of like how much is Inside Out 2 gonna do? Is it gonna drop? And it kind of doesn't really matter if how A Quiet Place Day 1 does, like good if it hits number 1, if Inside Out is still number 1, like Inside Out 1 opened number 2 to Jurassic World back in 2015. So it doesn't really matter. Am I gonna take my nephew to that? I don't think so. You know, nor would I take him to Despicable Me 4 because he didn't even sit through 3. And that opens in 2 weeks. Is scheduled to open a bunch of records. But that's the box office report for you. So I'll get on to some more movie news of the week and whatnot. Okay. So on to part 2. I wanted to bring up a movie. Sorry, here. Gonna try and get more of the stuff. Sorry, before my microphone was hitting the chair or attached to the table, which was hitting the chair, so I was trying to hit it less. So I apologize for the mic difficulties. Really, really do. Shoot, that was a big one. The show must go on. So, as I adjust here, carefully, carefully, carefully. Okay. Um, I wanted to talk about something that stuck with me, and that was this week, The Bike Riders Open, directed by Jeff Nichols, who I mentioned. And next week, A Quiet Place Day 1 opens. Jeff Nichols originally was offered to direct this movie, and he made it, turned in a script that was well liked, and he didn't end up making it. Director Michael Sarnowski, who made the movie Pig, that's with Nicolas Cage with the long hair, looks like a homeless person, and he turns out to be looking for his famous award-winning truffle pig. Um, Anyways, that director did the Quiet Place prequel, and I mentioned before the why I'm not excited for A Quiet Place Day One because it looks like it could have been directed by anything, and this answers that. Now, Michael Sarnowski was credited with the script of this movie, so maybe he was Jeff Nichols was uncredited, but here's why Jeff Nichols said he walked away from making A Quiet Place Day One. He said John Krasinski, who wrote and directed the first two, he co-wrote the first one, completely wrote the second one, and directed both. He said John Krasinski was a fan of my films and was asking me if I wanted to make this prequel. At the time, the calculus was, well, those movies are pretty good, and I liked what they said about sacrifice and family. It felt thematically in line with some of the stuff I'd made, like Midnight Special, that I'm adding. I hatched an idea of how to approach it in a way that I felt comfortable with, that he seemed to like. I was like, I think this is a movie that could get made. After Nicholas submitted his script, he came to the realization that it wasn't going to be the best fit. It's hard to say this without sounding pretentious, but I've made enough films at this point in my career that if I do this, it's going to become my film, he said. And the truth is, Quiet Place, those are his films, referring to Krasinski. At some point, you realize it's never going to be my film. It's better if I just step away and let some other people do that. And that project eventually became A Quiet Place Day One with Michael Sarnowski writing and directing, and it stars Lupita Nyong'o and Joseph Quinn. And as you might tell from the title, it takes place first day of the alien invasion. The film is set to hit theaters on June 28th. Okay, so thank you, Kevin Fraser, for writing that article for Joe Blow. That's a well-written article. Haven't seen anyone else really get on that, so bravo to Arrow in the Head. Uh, Win column for genre films again. Um, so that answers my question of when I see A Quiet Place Day One, I'm like, anybody could have done this. It doesn't look like necessarily the guy who made that pig movie, but like you just see the same two sequences of Lupita and Joseph Quinn trying to get through the rotating door and the luggage bag handler bag tips over, and then they have to run and Jaimin Hansu saying shush and that kind of thing. And it just kind of looks like a generic, you see the asteroids falling disaster movies, so you're like, oh, that's out of Armageddon, but less interesting here. And the backgrounds aren't filled, it's just them running by themselves, and it looks like they're just in a barren mall. None of it looks particularly distinct. It's like it could take place anywhere. And the word is that that movie cost around 100 million to, and it looks like it cost maybe 20 million. It only runs for about like 100 minutes and stuff, and it's the longest movie in the series so far. But it's kind of, somebody said, oh, it's disappointing that like 100 minutes is now considered short. I'm like, 100 minutes, I would consider it short. Anything under 110 minutes short, anything over like 120 minutes is like fine. Anything over 120 minutes is like long. Every minute you go over 2 hours is long. And then 2 hours is like, to me, the perfect length of like a sizable movie that's like edited well and whatnot. This movie coming out, Quiet Place Day One, is edited by Gregory Plotkin, who has done so many movies, like he did Game Night and Get Out, which is funny, and several Paranormal Activity films. And he did the Ghost Dimension. That's how I know him. I knew his stuff. One of the movies he edited was Frequency, which I really want to see. And then he also did Friday Night Lights movie, He's Just Not That Into You, Paranormal Activity 2, 3, 4, World War Z. Again, I like the editing on that movie. Get Out. He should have won kind of an Oscar for that, but because that's like just excellently done. And then, he did The Nun 2 and Five Nights at Freddy's. It's so funny these craft members doing movies like that. Like you really bounce from like when you work for the studio, like you get to work on like famous movies, like movies that are important to the roster of these film companies, but you really get bounced around everywhere in so many different genres. And it's like, we just need somebody who's good. Like, there's no, oh, we need a horror editor. It's like, no, we need an editor. It doesn't matter who. And so you get these like hilarious things where it's like the cinematographer of It is the same as the cinematographer as Uncharted, is the same cinematographer as was that movie that Edgar Wright did that was taking place in London in like the swinging 60s. Why can't I remember that movie now? Last Night in Soho. Yeah. Um, Chung Hoon Chung, who also shot Old Boy. And it's like, okay, you go from Old Boy at one period in your career to It, and then Uncharted, which is like a very sunny, blockbustery movie. And it's just like, yeah, we know you know your ABCs. Just do whatever, man. And it's like that's the case for anybody who's not like a director or writer or actor. It's just like if you're a producer or music is a lot more emotion based, so it doesn't get that. But if you're like an editor or a cinematographer or period piece is a bit different. So for costume designers, but a lot of the case when you're like not on the marquee, like if you're not the director, the writer, um, or the star, you're basically like not relegated to you're not typecast. You're just doing work that's available. So I just always found that funny how you can like look at any movie coming out and then if you go on IMDb and you see like the editor of it, you're like, oh, this is like one of the best editors working today because the studio could like afford them. But then you look at and they've done like everything in every genre and like completely different famous movies you've heard of. I find that funny. Um, and I wanted to see here for the list of accolades received by Get Out. If it was nominated. No, it was just nominated for the majors, picture, director, actor, screenplay, which was feeling to me like this is a good movie. It was a hit. It was important. We have to recognize it. We'll give it all the main awards, but like downstream isn't important. Even though like Get Out for 4.5 million especially is like everything about it should have been known. Like I've mentioned this before. I think Get Out is the most important film of the last 10 years. The most important film of the last 10 years in terms of cultural zeitgeist, in terms of movies that change the way people think. Like, it didn't alter my brain chemistry or anything, but it did make me feel differently when the police officer at the end or the police officer car at the end like comes and then the foot steps out and the universal groan of everybody in the theater put the fear of God in the eyes of like white people of like that's what black people feel like when the cops show up. And it's like, oh, I get it now. All the work was put into that movie to incidentally make you understand that and put you in that position. And it's done so well. And it's because of that, even if Jordan Peele were to do not great movies for the rest of your life, like I think Nope has some interesting stuff in it, but it's not a great movie. If he continues doing movies like that, I'd be like, and I'll be like, that's fine. He made this one great movie that'll live forever, and that's Get Out. Yeah. So, that's the criticism people give Jeff Nichols is like he'll never have his Get Out. He'll just always make, Us and Nope and stuff and like these kind of interesting good movies that like don't completely resonate but are still pretty good in their own right. So it's interesting for him to after getting that criticism on film Twitter, which again, not real life, but getting that and then being like, I didn't do this because I couldn't be enough of me. I couldn't be an auteur. I couldn't, do this. And the article made me think about John Krasinski, and I mentioned If a bit earlier, which is what he decided to do after doing A Quiet Place Part 2, and he'll probably return to that and do Part 3, which he had in his back pocket in case this flopped, and it remains to be seen. But John Krasinski produces A Quiet Place Day One, and Ava DuVernay, who had done Selma, uh, basically, and she had the reputation as like a historical stylist of Black history. And then, she followed that up with, 13th, which was a documentary, which I believe won the Academy Award for Best Documentary, if I'm not mistaken. I have to double check myself because I hate on podcasts or videos when I listen to something and somebody cannot find out something, like they mention a fact and they get it like wrong, and they're like confidently wrong, or they're like, oh, I don't know this thing, and I'm like, oh, it's so obvious. No, it was Academy Award nominated and it didn't win. Does it say what it won that year? No, it does not. Okay, well, that's great. Now I have to go down and think what won Best Documentary. OJ Made in America, which is absolutely amazing. Like one of the best stories ever told. It is a story about America, something that could only happen in America. And it tells you top to bottom who OJ is, how he is, why he is, who he is, how he is, when he was. Like, it answers everything. And it's just an incredible piece of media. It's available on Disney Plus. And it unfairly won Best Documentary because it's a television miniseries. But the distributor, which is Disney, ESPN Films, was like, well, if we release it, it's 467 minutes long. Um, so if we divide that by 60 here, I'm not sure if my math is correct. I failed math. Um, it's like a 7 going towards 8 hour experience. And it's like, well, if we just play it like a movie and we stack all the episodes together for somebody to binge it and then release it in a theater at a qualifying run, which is like 2 weeks in LA somewhere, we play this 8 hour movie. Um, it doesn't matter, only one person really has to see it. If you pay for a movie in LA to run for 2 weeks in a theater, you qualify for the Academy Awards. It doesn't matter how bad your movie is. I saw this and it was like $500, and I didn't have $500 at the time, but I wanted to release my short film. And you can do it for short films too, to qualify for the Academy Awards. Um, but I didn't do it because my movie was made in 2016 and released, and it was um, in it played at a film festival already, which was just like a very small bare minimum qualification for awards. It qualifies as a title on my IMDb page, Feel the Rush. Um, but to get an actual awards qualifying release for the Academy Awards, no. But nonetheless, I thought it was interesting. If I have the money, maybe I'll waste it on doing that. But that was, I believe, by Shutterstock or something. They provided me a link to, hey, if you pay this person $500, they will play your short film with a stack of others in a theater somewhere. Who knows, in LA for a week, because they have like 20 theaters in LA, county alone, probably more. Movie capital of the world. But like, if you just pay somebody this $500, they will play your movie um, somewhere, and that will fit the bare minimum awards qualification for applying for the Academy Awards. Um, and I would probably also meet, because that movie was made with two women, Virginia Murray, who did the story, and Tamara Mishish Cohen, who also did the story, and then Virginie, um, did the camera work as well and stuff like that. So that would qualify for the Academy as like diversity rules and qualifications. So that's pretty cool. Uh, Right on. And yeah, so look that up. If you make a movie and you can make something like literally on your phone, you can pay somebody to show it in a theater and then have it be listed again at the end of the year. And nobody looks at this except film nerds, but they have a list of like everything that qualifies for like every category that met the qualifications. And it's like 500 films that get released every year. But you can be one of those 500 movies that like qualifies for an Academy Award and then doesn't get nominated. But like if your name shows up on a list somewhere and you didn't write it, that's good, right? So, anyways, that's why Jeff Nichols walked away from the new Quiet Place movie. So, next on the docket is I wanted to mention a guy on Twitter, which I thought was funny, Shinobi602, and he has 182,000 followers, and this was like in my notifications. I'm not sure if I'll be able to find it here off the cuff because it was like something that I did a response to very annoyingly. And I wonder if it's because Twitter finally switched to X.com this week. But he basically said, one thing I'll never be on this app is fake. And then he talked about his love for video games and stuff like that. And I just think of this other tweet that somebody said where, you know, people whose profile pictures are of celebrities, um, I will just never trust you. Like, are you Christopher Lloyd? You have Doc Brown from Back of the Future as your profile picture. Are you Christopher Lloyd? How do I know? Um, and that's just with people on Twitter. It's like you can say all you want, but being, you know, like if your profile picture isn't yourself, nobody's going to trust you because you're not you. Like there's this other person on Twitter, AMC Vagrant, and I don't pay too much attention because it's a really small circle in the corner. But like, I had this, I knew that it was like a woman that I was talking to, and then I saw that it was like, I looked up, oh, it's a celebrity. Oh, it's like a model. And then I'm like, oh, am I talking to a dude that just changes his profile picture every month to like a different celebrity woman? That's like odd. And then that did like kind of change my opinion on that person's thing because I realized I wasn't talking to somebody who was authentic. I don't care what you say, but like if you stand behind your words and you have a selfie of yourself, it I wouldn't necessarily say it gets you respect. It gets you some sort of respect, but it makes you a person. Um, and that's more than I can say for, most of the people on Twitter. Um, Caricature of yourself is kind of different, but I think it still qualifies because it's like something original. If you have a picture of like a movie character or celebrity, it's like get out of here. Like you're not special. You're not anything. Um, yeah, so that's how a lot of my conversations go because I just think like, you can act all tough and stuff like that, but this guy Shinobi 6201, he's talking about like being authentic and that whole thing. And for me, it's like your picture is Newman from Seinfeld. You're not real. You're not a real person. If I ever teach, which would be funny, if I ever teach a class on social media, I would spend a day. I wouldn't make it a whole course, but I would like how to respond to somebody on Twitter. It's like step one, look at their profile picture. If their profile picture isn't a real person, don't respond to them because they're not a real person. If you're a real person, you're sending yourself short. You're selling yourself short because you're then talking to somebody who's a cartoon. Don't waste your time. So I just find it funny. I like what he says a lot of the time, at least from just recollection. There's a Maya Angelou quote of people won't remember what you said, but they will remember how you made them feel. That's true here because I cannot remember anything Shinobi said, but I can remember he made me feel good previously. It's just to see then him go like, one thing I will never be is fake when he has a fake profile picture is just the height of irony. Not even irony. It's a better word to describe that. Hypocrisy. Yeah. Yeah. One thing I'll never be is fake, except for when it comes to my profile picture, when it comes to gassing up my 182,000 followers. So good for you, Shinobi 602. Um, Rest in peace, Donald Sutherland. I wanted to mention this more fully. I might have mentioned it last time, but you think of the main roles that Donald Sutherland is known for. He won an Oscar, and it was a ceremonial Oscar, meaning that it wasn't a competitive one. He was given one from the Academy, which I actually think, the more I think about it, is in a way more meaningful because it's like, forget the competition. We're giving this to you because we know you're important and we might have missed your roles because if you don't do Oscar-y roles, then they mess up. One of their biggest mess ups was Ordinary People won Best Picture, beat Raging Bull, which irritates people. Those people, in my opinion, have not seen Ordinary People, or like I saw Ordinary People. I'm like, oh, that's boring. Raging Bull is probably better. And then I watched Bull, and I was like bored by it. I'm like, oh, this sucks. So like both movies suck, but I like Ordinary People better. That movie got nominated for like Best Supporting Actor twice, Best Actress, and then Donald Sutherland wasn't nominated, and he's like the central role. It's about a family in distress. It's basically a TV movie. So, like, structurally, in terms of authorship, Robert Redford directs it. Alvin Sargent, pretty good screenplay. Structurally, I like it. It's all built around a shocking reveal. Manchester by the Sea uses that similar structure to much better effect, in my opinion. But Alvin Sargent, great screenwriter, recently passed. He also wrote Spider-Man 2, in my opinion, uh, probably one of the second best superhero screenplays of all time, next to The Dark Knight, of course. But Alvin Sargent was a guy who was not into, you know, deep lore of comic books and stuff, but he cracked Spider-Man 2 of like, what makes this guy tick? And they had a hard time writing that screenplay. So the fact that the guy who wrote Ordinary People and was like a career screenwriter well into um, older age, is just really impressive to me. Anyways, Ordinary People stars Donald Sutherland. He is married to Mary Tyler Moore. Their son is Timothy Hutton. He goes to therapy. His therapist is played by Judd Hirsch. You have back and forth on like what makes this family tick. And at the center of it all is the father fighting with the mother. Father is played by Donald Sutherland. That is one of the main roles I think of Donald Sutherland for. The other one is Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which I saw for the first time recently. Pretty good film. Of course, there's the scene of Donald Sutherland screaming um, and pointing, which is like a meme. Basically, if you've seen it, I won't give any more away. But like, I kind of knew that going in, so it kind of um, uh, is more than I wanted to know, I guess. So, like, I knew the context surrounding it because it's so iconic. But if you haven't seen it, I won't say any more. I'll say that it's a pretty good movie. It's like The Thing on steroids, even though it's like about 5 years before The Thing. And apparently it's about communism or something like that. But it's basically some kind of virus or pod of nature, some freak of nature falls to Earth from the asteroids, from Mars, from wherever and implants itself into plants and starts producing like pods, seeds, and stuff that when it comes into contacts with humans, produces these pod shell like figures and inhabits their mind. and people become motionless and emotionless, and it slowly takes over the world and society. It's a very chilling movie. It follows one, I believe, who is a botanist, and the other, who is Donald Sutherland, is a health inspector. Maybe they work together at the health inspection agency, local government agency. So there's this interesting subtext too about like the government response versus this, and it like as it changes. It's a very ambitious film. And so it's interesting to watch. I thought it held up beautifully. It was remade twice. Once, well, it's a remake itself from a 50s film that was very B-movie-esque. So them going from the 50s to the 70s, and then it got remade as Body Snatchers in like 92, never saw it. And then The Invasion with Nicole Kidman, Daniel Craig, which was apparently very boring. I remember seeing the trailer, but I skipped it. Came out in 2007. Saw it on TV for like 5 minutes, and I'm like, oh, looks bad. But this 70s version is very good, so I'd recommend it. The first thing that I saw Donald Sutherland in as a kid was The Italian Job, and he's in it at the beginning. And it's funny how that made impression on me of like, this is who Donald Sutherland is, because I find your first impression of an actor in the role they play pretty much always sticks with them. Like if it's a significant enough role in the plot, um, that sticks with you. So the Italian Job, he's the mentor to Mark Wahlberg, and it's very much a, young buck and mentor. Kind of like Nathan Drake and Sully, had Mark Wahlberg not gotten too old to play Nathan Drake, even though he was like kind of a tenuous fit at best. He'd sort of got it. Like he had the rough and tumble ruggedness of like I'm an adventurer kind of thing. But yeah, him as Sully is kind of odd. I guess if I were the director of the next Uncharted, I would tell him, model your character after Donald Sutherland, because that's who Sully is in a way. He's a genial elder guy who, has had his fun and is ready to look at things from afar. He's seen the movie, and he's the watcher. That's who Sully is. He's watching Drake's story unfold. Um, and that's much less active and stuff. And Mark Wahlberg still wants to be in the center of a lot of his movies. Very rarely will he do a supporting role, unless he's working with David O. Russell. But the less said about David now, the better. And then, of course, Donald Sutherland's most famous role now is President Snow, and that was the coronation of like, we need, like, this is the big elder statesman role. He's the big villain. He's the Voldemort and whatnot. And of course, he got a prequel about him, which was cool enough. But in the book of the Hunger Games book, President Snow is described as having a face that looks like a snake, and that is so Donald Sutherland. It's funny. Kiefer, his son, not so much. And in fact, Kiefer and Donald worked together on one film, which guy I knew, Doug Falconer produced, and that was the one film that they did together, was a Western. Don't think it particularly reviewed very well, but they were asked like, "Why'd you choose this film?" And he's like, "I don't know. It just seemed odd that we hadn't worked together as father and son before, so we figured, hey, why not this?" And they didn't work together again after that, but the that was the movie that they did together, and the movie that was, if I can remember it, I can't remember it offhand because it wasn't a super memorable um, title. Um, but if I can find the movie here, Forsaken from 2015, and yeah, uh, it is Canadian revisionist Western film, directed by John Cassar. Um, it was at Toronto International Film Festival, and one of the executive producers on the film was Doug Falconer, who, when I took the photo of a falcon, I took a pretty good photo of an osprey, actually, this week at Bell Park in Kingston. and yeah, it's like a hawk. Um, um, so it is a raptor. It's a large raptor, and I can see looking at it that it was, because it's like the bird of prey. That's what raptor means, and I know that from the movies. But yeah, seeing an osprey did remind me of Doug Falconer, even though I'm exchanging a hawk for a falcon. But yeah, Doug Falconer produced Forsaken, the one collaboration between Donald and Kiefer Sutherland. Um, another thing that I wanted to mention was I listened to the Town podcast with Matt Bellany, and an interesting person from another world came up, Scott Galloway. And Galloway is kind of I don't want to say pundit, but I don't know what to think of somebody who routinely is a guest on talk shows. Um, he has been a guest on like CNN and other things. And I saw him on Real Time with Bill Maher as well. And I find that he's taken up the space that has been left vacant from Jordan Peterson as kind of like wanting to be the voice for the growing concern of young men in the Western Hemisphere. And that's sort of been his lane that he's doing. He's like, who's talking about the lonely people? Who's looking after our generation now? Young people. I have an article in front of me now called The Loneliness Trap. It is said to be as bad as smoking, so will it shorten my lifespan? And I find it funny because I annoyingly become more and more frustrated with my own generation's um, preponderance for rules, ridiculous rules of social order that they just like make up. Um, uh, yeah. Preponderance means to add more weight or more importance to loading this page, which I clicked on and then doesn't give it. Um, Having more weight or importance than something else. Okay. A superiority or excess in number. Okay. Quantity or importance. Okay, yeah. So our generation tends to place more emphasis on social order than is necessary. And the best example of that I can think of immediately is that on TikTok, um, there were girls who were doing videos that were like, do I actually like this guy? Or is he my coworker? And I'm thinking like, why can't it be both? It's like, oh, do I actually like this guy? Or is he 6'4"? And they both nod and they're like, yeah, he's 6'4". Why can't it be both? And then this person comments who's like clearly an older person. They're like, back in my day, we just liked people, you know. Um, Makes me think my generation just doesn't like people at all. um, because they like were the only generation I can think of that invents reasons not to like people because like Me Too happened, and in order to rationalize it, people instead of rationalizing the behavior as bad, were retroactively trying to think like, oh well, Harvey Weinstein has always been an asshole, which is true. But it's like, therefore, everything he's always been evil. Like evil is not something that is achieved or that people turn into, but it's like omnipotent. So people are like, therefore, if you look hard enough, somebody was always shit and they never did anything good in their lives. Like I was talking to somebody the other day of like the revisionism behind Seinfeld now, where people are like, "Oh, Jerry Seinfeld was always crap. Larry David did all the work for Seinfeld," which isn't true. Like Jerry Seinfeld just like used his comedic skills effectively and leveraged a hit. Um, and he put a lot of work into it. Like, give it credit to credit is due. You can't just hate him because A, he's Jewish, which honestly, like, there is a lot of anti-Semitism going on, which is, of course, fueling the, you know, Hamas versus Israel, online war. I'm not even talking about, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I'm talking about how online, how it's manifested as like pro Hamas messaging versus like pro Netanyahu messaging. And it's just very bizarre. It's like, are you for this terrorist group or for this terrorist group? And it's like, you can think that both are terrible. Like that is completely fine. And a lot of the things, some Jewish people like Ben Dreyfus was like, you know what? Yeah, I'm gonna say it. Israel has killed too many people, post October 7th. And somebody's like, oh my God, like, how can you say that? Is there like a figure of human damage that you just randomly decided like 25,000 is too many? And Ben Dreyfus was like, yeah, like at some point I was like, as a Jewish person, um, yeah, they've killed too many people. This isn't right anymore. And it's like, that's okay. Like people put far too much weight on like having the moral high ground on everything, forgetting that like it's all relative. Like, you know, things can be one thing can be terrible and something else can be a different kind of terrible. But that doesn't mean that the other kind of terrible is in any way lesser. It's just you need to get out of like having everything in one bubble and compartmentalize. And I just think through aggregate, the Rotten Tomatoes, the Metascore, social media, ultra everything is connected piece has gotten into our heads a little bit. And as a result, everything has to be viewed in a single vacuum. And it just bears a lot of weight and is exhausting. Of like, it's easy for me because I'm overly analytical, or easier for me than it is for others. Of like, I was saying the other day, like, people are posting pro-Palestinian messaging, which is fine. I'm for the two-state solution of Palestine. Um, and a lot of people have been overly simplistic, and I'll get to Lana Pierce. Hopefully, I can remember that because that was on Twitter this week as well. Um, where I'll tread on this as best as I can. But it's like people are posting stuff on Instagram pro Palestine of like, Israel is killing these people, Netanyahu is killing these people, all of which I believe. Um, and what I'm wondering is, and Coney 2012 was kind of a wake up call, the social movement from 10 years ago of like, social activism and go and do this thing, which resulted in very little, next to no real world change. In fact, online, it just convinced people of like, this is how you do a social movement digitally without really setting foot on real life solid ground. Um, People posting Instagram stories. And I wonder, and I have friends who do this, whose mind are you changing? Like, at what point are you just posting for yourself? Like, what you're doing is you're posting facts that you got from Al Jazeera, which is a decent, reputable enough website, but they get their facts from Hamas, the numbers that they give them. So, Hamas, being a terrorist organization, it's not very surprising when the United Nations finds out that, oh, the terrorist organization lied about how many people Israel killed. Go figure. Like, to me, it's just people don't use their brains enough or weigh their conscience enough where they like have multiple sources. Like, what is it that we were taught in high school? You have to have three separate sources on something in order for it to, like, that's basic ABCs. That we were taught that in like grade 7 for our book reports. And then, essay writing in high school. And most people have graduated high school, certainly all of the people that I talk to on social media, but it's like they get all of their sources from one source. Like I can't stand um, CNN and the way that they're covering, and I just know how they're going to cover the upcoming presidential debate. It's like Joe Biden will be prepared, he'll do fine, standard amount of seniors moment. Trump will be totally incoherent, probably pretty funny. he won't have studied for it at all because he's never studied for anything really in his life. He studied a bit for the second or third debate he had with Hillary because he did poorly enough. But with guys arguing, it's different. Like women bring receipts, but like when you're dealing with two guys, it's like a different thing. So, and they're both in their 70s, so I don't think it will be like, I don't think this ground will shift at all. We know who these people are, although it's essential to have a debate, of course. Um, but what's going to happen is this: they're going to have a debate, nothing is going to change. And then CNN is going to come on, get their pundits, and they're going to get one pundit from the left and one pundit from the right. The pundit from the left is going to be like, Joe Biden absolutely destroyed Donald Trump. Oh, people will see, you know. And then the pundit on the right, who's basically an economic terrorist, will be like, oh, Trump is the way. And then they'll mention like crazy things about Joe Biden, maybe some of which are true, who knows. Um, Actually, we do know most of the time they just kind of make crap up. I can get into kind of some stuff about Joe Biden that I discovered, which doesn't, I don't think I really have the bandwidth for it. In terms of like discussing this, so, like this should be a film podcast, but I'm dipping into media here, so I'll save that for a special subject. Leave it to Pac-Man, David Pac-Man, who talks about some of that stuff better than I. And he's popped up on there, and he seems to sort of know what he's talking about and stuff. So I'll leave it to Pac-Man. Just like how I leave gaming analysis and investor talk to Michael Pachter. Um, Anyways, so what's gonna happen is they're gonna have an insane guy and convicted felon on one side, and then they're gonna have Joe Biden on the other, who's like a doddering old man. And no matter what happens, they're gonna have the pundits who each say one side destroyed the other, and nothing's gonna change. And what bothers me about this is that Trump is a convicted felon, and yet CNN is going to treat him like, oh, well, we have to respect the other side, and just get somebody who's like a paid actor to say no matter what that, the Republicans destroyed the Democrats and stuff, and like nothing will get solved and moved on. Really, the best thing to do would be to get totally separate people who are not in any way affiliated with the Democrats or the Republican, and have those be the two people who talk about that kind of stuff. Now, granted, they might be slightly polarizing as well, but it's just so annoying to hear people like want to get in their sound bites and not really engage. And that's kind of what we're dealing with here. What I will get to is that Scott Galloway, who I mentioned, is kind of picking up the Peterson torch, and talking about people in our generation and whatnot. He is kind of like a mix of self-help and politics. So I was really surprised to hear Scott Galloway on a movie podcast, essentially about the entertainment industry. And what's funny to me is that he goes on this podcast, and it is very much outside of his realm. Anytime somebody who doesn't know about movies or video games goes in and tries to talk about movies or video games, or in any industry, it becomes obvious that he doesn't really know what he's talking about. He worked at the New York Times, and so his big criticism was about the strikes and how the writers basically screwed themselves. They should have gone after Silicon Valley rather than, the Hollywood movie producers, and they should have sued, and basically the whole industry should unite against Silicon Valley, which I agree with fundamentally. That is true. But it is also unrealistic because nobody is ever that ambitious. Nobody is going to take up the crusade and fight the real enemy, you know. It's like us fighting global warming. Like, we can gradually do it in small steps and chip away at it, but nobody's going to take up a cause unless you're Greta Thunberg. Um, but what's interesting to me is that he kind of doesn't give Matt Bellany the credit. Matt Bellany is an interesting guy. His podcast is only, a few years old. It started with the Will Smith slap. Um, and he's like an entertainment lawyer, but he's seen as more of a like a pundit. Like he did a lot of interviews with the Hollywood Reporter, and he just says his own opinions. But people forget that, similar to me, he kind of knows his facts, and he reads them in his own way. And there's a scene that happens, if you listen to the podcast partway through, where Scott brings up like the writer's strike and that the writers shot themselves in the foot. And he's like, remind me again, like, what the writers actually achieved this last strike, as kind of like an open question of like, yeah, they hardly achieved anything, right? And then Matt Bellany, like, mentions just off the top of his head, well, they achieved this, 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 and this. And then Scott Galloway backs up and he's just like, well, you know more about this industry than me. And then goes on to say that, like, what he failed to do with the newspaper industry when he was working at the New York Times is what the writers should do now, um, which is an unrealistic and hypocritical expectation. But nonetheless, it's an interesting episode, for so great for having you on, Scott. But I just kind of find it funny that, people have their strengths and weaknesses, and it's good that he went on, Scott Galloway, and was challenged. But I he does a lot of touring of like doom and gloom, and it's like this is not the way, and doesn't really present solutions. I try and present solutions on here of like, well, this is what should happen. But yeah. Not that often do people really present solutions. So I was glad that somebody kind of put the brakes on him, and he ran into somebody who basically knew what they were talking about. Who Matt Bellany is like an easygoing to talk to guy. There's an open invitation on his blog to, go on and talk about stuff if you're famous enough. I'm not famous yet. But I found it was funny because it's like, oh, this will be easy. I'll say my thing. I'll present my thesis and I won't get any pushback. And then you get unexpected pushback because it's basically like a guy coming from outside the industry saying, you all suck. Here's why. And then somebody saying, well, here's the actual reality of it. So good on you, Matt Bellany. Listen to the Town podcast. It's only a half-hour podcast, and it's about the business nuts and bolts told from an entertainment lawyer's perspective. So, yeah, I find it very valuable. Um, yeah. Uh, um, Exhibitor Relations Company. I'm going back to box office just for a brief here because they labeled if a misfire. It's not quite. It's like at 106 million. It cost 110. It's made 106 domestically. It'll break even. That's all I wanted to say. Exhibitor Relations Company. Um, uh, Another Twitter cleanup. This is all about Twitter, which I'd still want to call Twitter because it's a better name than X. Like if I say X, I could be talking about everything. But anyway, this relates to the depressed woe is me attitude of my generation, and that is the movie After Sun, which is just a depressing piece of like cinema. I find it very spare, um, very thin. It's like uh, a woman goes on vacation with her dad. The woman is like an 8-year old, and her dad is like in his 20s. He's a young father. And it's just basically her point of view. She's looking through her videotapes footage and realizing an adult, like, how sad he was and he didn't get the help that he needed. And somebody tweeted Happy Father's Day, showing this character that Paul Mescal plays in this movie. And I was saying that, and this is like the Catholic in me speaking and whatnot. So I was like, Happy Father's Day. And I'm like, he's a terrible father. And they're like, what drew you to this conclusion? And I'm like, he commits suicide and he has a child. And they're like, okay, so is that the measure of his parenting? And I'm like, yes, yes, it is. If you give up as a parent, because a parent's job is never done, and you have a child, you are a bad father. You do not get a pass for being clinically depressed, as sad as it is, and it's, a mental disease, and I'm sympathetic to that. But it's just this glorification. I'm speaking more broadly now. This glorification of my generation has with depression is kind of like an explanation and rationale uh, without needing to provide an answer of something. It's like, oh, why isn't this working? Well, I'm depressed. You know, uh, it will never work. It won't work, and it's sad, and we just got to deal with that. Okay, how do we deal with it? Well, it's that you can't deal with it. It's too depressing, and it's just kind of like this misery porn that we're all kind of trapped in that social media has become, where um, somebody posts something sad and how hopeless something is, and everybody agrees. So we all agree at how terrible it is, and kind of nobody wants to do anything about it because it's not practical. It's not realistic. You can't relate to that. I just kind of reject that because if you accept that, then you end up like Paul Mescal in After Sun, death, you know? So yeah, I just reject that. Like I reject your misery porn. Um, you know, how's that for non-negativity? Uh, I just wanted to mention that, like, just for your information, suicide is bad, and if you do it and you're a parent, you're extra bad. Um, and that's the end of that. The other funny thing about clearing it up is that another guy I follow, Rolo Tony, whose name is a play on Rolo Tomasi, who was a character mentioned in LA Confidential, and is also Rolo Tony Browntown, which was, um, I believe, from Tim and Eric Awesome Show. Great Job. Um, that's where he gets his name. So, uh, the Arbiter of Truth refuses to admit Furiosa is bad. So, what happened here was Rolo Tony, at poor old Rolo Tony, who has, a few more followers than me, 5,000. He's refers to himself as the Wistful Review. Um, and his in his bio is a quote by Sarah Michelle Gellar in the movie Southland Tales. Scientists are saying that the future is going to be far more futuristic than they originally predicted. You can hear that in the trailer for Southland Tales, which has a good uh, trailer and was referenced this week because Justin Timberlake is in it and has his own, kind of musical moment in it. And people were referencing that musical moment because it seems like it was thought up drunkenly, and Justin Timberlake had a DWI this week. But anyways, Rolo Tony tweets that someplace somewhere this guy is cooking up the absolute most unhinged Furiosa looks bad take you've ever heard. It's a picture of Kevin Smith in Live Free or Die Hard, um, playing basically the guy in the computer chair who lives in his mom's basement. And that's just the image he's conjuring up and saying, these keyboard warriors, these dweebs, are saying Furiosa looks bad and they're losing their minds over it. What do they know? And, you know, I guess it's this attitude because the first, or rather previous Mad Max Fury Road was infused with feminism. So therefore, the enemy, the critics of Mad Max Fury Road, and I gave it a B plus, but I didn't think it was as great as everybody else said, are people who are misogynists. So therefore, the misogynists are saying that Furiosa looks bad, not because it actually looks bad, but because they are misogynist. And these are all of the people. I'm painting a picture of all the people that dislike Furiosa. They are all misogynists. That claim is ludicrous because I say so. You know, that's just what I believe his level of thinking is behind that tweet. And my response to him was, "You're the guy. You know, you're the guy in the chair." Uh, because if it wasn't clear by the box office receipts, the majority of people thought it looked bad and the people who thinks it looks good in all its green screen glory are the people in the chair. Um, to which I'm referring that, like, in his picture of Kevin Smith from Die Hard, he's referring to a guy who's like an anomaly, the one guy. He's, or at least a minority of thinking. And his position, Rolo Tony's, is that the minority of people believe that Furiosa looks bad. And I'm posting a review by uh, his name is His name is Owen Hates Movies. He's become a popular TikTok critic, and I like his points of view. He's a younger fella. Anyway, I just posted a video on TikTok to Rolo Tony of his response of just like all of the people saying Furiosa looks bad. I didn't see it. Furiosa looks bad. I didn't see it. It's multiple people. And granted, TikTok has a bot problem. But like I post this to Rolo Tony. And Rolo Tony says, yes, because the arbiter of truth is the TikTok comment section. Fair enough. Twitter has a bot problem. You can't like really believe that. And I said, okay, well, the arbiter of truth is the sub 100 million domestic numbers, meaning in North America, this movie made under 100, uh, less than $100 million. It's made 65 million just in the North America. The last movie, by comparison, made about 146 million. This has made less than half of that. That should be an example that audiences as a whole rejected this movie. And he has since not responded to it because I am right. Um, this movie looked green screen to death. If it looked good, it would have been a hit. It didn't look good. People didn't care that, like, a I mean, maybe they cared a little bit that it was like a Mad Max movie that didn't star Mad Max. Maybe that factored a bit. But I think largely, en masse, people do not care that like Furiosa stars a woman. They care that it's like an action movie about monster trucks mowing people down. Like that's an action movie. That looks cool to me. What doesn't look cool is the green screen. You know, people don't care. Like, they don't care one way or another. They have no opinions. And movie studios are the same. They're like, we'll do this if it supports the numbers. And people are like, I'll do this if it doesn't look good. Other people on Twitter who are like, well, actually, the person who made this movie is like Steve Mnuchin, and he's a member of the Trump administration. So he's garbage and he's a bad person. So you must dislike that. And it's like, that's why the Suicide Squad is garbage. And it's like, but Steve Mnuchin, who's the former Secretary of the Treasury of under Trump, the Trump administration, also produced Mad Max Fury Road. Uh, so does that mean that you know that movie's bad? And it's like it's ridiculous. Bad people can make good movies. Good people can make bad movies. Let's have some diversity of opinion here. Like, not everything's a monolith. Again, it's just my generation's aggregate thoughts of like everything is in one giant vacuum space, uh, and we get pulled one way or the other. And it's just you really have to have a deep understanding of how industry works, um, in order to have like kind of a complex opinion of it. And, I don't think that's necessarily a knowledge thing. Like I don't think that only people who understand how the film industry works can have a valid opinion on it. I think anybody who can develop their own opinions and has a mature voice can do that. Because what I love in particular is like if you listen to Quentin Tarantino's reviews of movies, they will be like the most crazy reviews of the movie. Like his thing of There Will Be Blood is like what they don't show you is okay. Um, Daniel Plainview, played by Daniel Day Lewis, in a transformative performance, is so good that um, you forget about the scene where he falls down the well and like breaks his leg. Okay, and he goes and he crawls himself across what must be miles and miles of land, and in order to get there and save himself. That's not shown in the movie. Okay. So the fact that he did this amazing thing and it's not shown in the movie lets you know what kind of character you're dealing with. And that is so great that that would have been enough to be a movie on its own. Um, and it's like, I never thought of that. That's like a really interesting example made by somebody who thinks about movies that has like nothing to do with how the movie was made or even what goes on in the movie, but it demonstrates thought from somebody with a high skill level and knowledge of somebody who's thought a lot about the thing that they're critiquing and speaking about. That's really all that's necessary in criticism is just a degree of thought. I had remember in Italian cinemas class that I was watching, I think it was Rome Open City or was something. It could have been Umberto D. It might have been Umberto D. But there was a female in the movie who kind of had her own little plot line and stuff, and I said the most insane thing. I still can't believe that I like thought that this was a thing, and it was because of the visual grammar that I had seen before. I'd seen Revolutionary Road and the abortion device that Kate Winslet uses in Revolutionary Road. It's kind of like a tube that looks like a mini hot water bottle, and I saw that in Umberto D. And because I saw this, mediocre, forgettable Sam Mendes movie which Kate Winslet mentions that she forgets as well. But because I saw that, like the 1 second shot in Revolutionary Road of plot device, because I saw that and then went back like I was 15 when I saw when you see movies at age 12 to 15 years of age, they stick with you more than movies at any other age. So I saw, Revolutionary Road shot by Roger Deakins, and I see this image clear in my mind of like, ooh, that is that. That is something that is livable. That is something that exists. And it's just like an object that was like created by Justin Hayt's screenplay. And Justin Hayth also created, I believe he's the same guy who did Shogun. Am I wrong? I could be wrong. I, in fact, might very well be wrong. Oh, I'm thinking of Justin Marks, yeah. They're both named Justin. Give me a break. Anyway, I see Revolutionary Road when I'm like 15. And then I see Umberto D in University. And I see that same little kind of tube looking thing, but it's like a tap. It's just like a tap. And I'm like, ooh, that looks like the abortion thing that I saw, the little handheld like device. And then so I came up with this idea when the uh it's so embarrassing to say. Um Instructor said, write out what you think is happening in this scene, and I wrote that she was gonna that like heating up a kettle or whatever to get ready for an abortion, and that was just the most absolutely insane thing that uh the instructor had ever like read coming from me because like me and him just thought so incredibly differently about film, have an entirely different understanding of film grammar that he just could not fathom that somebody thought of something that was just so incredibly stupid to him because he's seen Umberto D. He teaches it like almost, well, I believe he might like switch it up every year. He might be one of those teachers. But like he's seen Umberto D a number of times. It is ingrained in his culture. He knows all the references. He knows every single little bit of it. So the mere fact that somebody would come in and suggest something that he hasn't even remotely pondered or even thought of, that is so far off from the meaning which he understands, like drives him up a wall, and he takes my blank page and he puts it like face down on the projector, like shuffles it around and stuff, marks out the name, and he's like, listen to how stupid this thing is. And I'm like so embarrassed because the loudmouth that I saw, like I'm so embarrassed. I told people, I'm like, yeah, it was me. Like I can't hold that in anymore. I told people were like, yeah, that was me. And he just goes bit by bit of how effing stupid my idea was that the one female character who in the morning is just preparing her morning, like putting on the kettle and stuff, was somehow getting ready for an abortion. But like he like can't believe it's like, is this guy's brain broken? Is he having an aneurysm or something? And he like puts it down, goes beat by beat of like, here's why this take is the stupidest take I've ever seen in my life. But I just think it's like great. I remember this one thing on the bonus round, a video game web series that Jeff Keighley hosted, where I think it was Garnet Lee from Shack News who met with Marcus Beer, the Annoyed Gamer, and they hadn't been on a panel discussion for. They always got like the Annoyed Gamer and Shane Satterfield, the CEO of Game Trailers at the time, before it was bought by IGN, and Michael Pachter, the investor. So the investor does his investor, plugs in the numbers thing. The Annoyed Gamer has his salty opinion, and then the CEO sort of like business guy is like, more diplomatic and melding in that. But then they get like kind of this news reporter. I can't remember if Garnet Lee was an entertainment journalist, news reporter is how he was credited anyway. But he has the point of view, and he runs up against uh, Marcus Beer, who has basically run the table for the last month or two with like the same amount of guests, where he'll just basically, he has such a strong opinion, he kind of bulldozes everything else. And then Garnet Lee just suggests something that's kind of wrong, but is wrong in a way that rubs Marcus Beer so raw that he gets so angrily upset. And I, as a viewer, and many people commented, it's like, yes, somebody broke through. Like, somebody finally said something different. This is like amazing. And like, you see it go wrongly. There's this episode of the Screen Junkies movie fights where this one woman, a black woman, is like, you know what? Heath Ledger wasn't any good as the Joker in The Dark Knight. He sucked. Every single one of the performances that year for Best Supporting Actor sucked. They were all white men. They were all generic, one of which included Michael Shannon in Revolutionary Road. And the only reason that Heath Ledger won is because of because he died. And of course, The Dark Knight is the internet's favorite movie, or was, maybe less so now. And people a couple years ago seemed to think that the Batman was ridiculous. Anyway, the entire fan community up in arms, is upset to say the least. And the panel members are so freaking upset at this. Me, who knows by, you know, reference, like it's burned into my brain, the top five people nominated for Best Supporting Actor that year, because it is my favorite panel um, group of Best Supporting Actors of any given year, because it was Heath Ledger, Robert Downey Jr. in Tropic Thunder, uh, Josh Brolin in Milk, who she says is the only good performance. It is a very good performance. Michael Shannon in Revolutionary Road, and Philip Seymour Hoffman in Dev. All good actors, all good performances. And she's saying they're all garbage, they're all whatever, they're all hacky. And I find that just absolutely hilarious, because I'm confident in my position. But what she said shook the foundation for what these people understood to be something that hadn't been challenged by them in so long, that um, it caused them to lose their balance and go mad and start panicking and like get angry and shake the trees themselves. And I just kind of find that fascinating. That like you know um, when your viewpoint is significantly challenged enough, because you have the numbers, that you can really engage with somebody, because they just are so taken with how your point of view is wrong. It basically leads them to study it more. And that's what happened. I wrote an article, toxic triggering film discourse about There Will Be Blood in a Guardian writer's article on how her boyfriend made her watch There Will Be Blood, and she's broken up with that boyfriend now. So, she's able to say that that movie sucks. And that like really annoyed me because I'm like, why does this annoy me? And I got to the bottom of it in a really good article. Uh, Toxic triggering film discourse, and it's another millennial woe is me, isn't my life terrible because I'm paid to review movies for a living, gosh this sucks kind of attitude that just people in another generation didn't have. And I'll use that as a transition to this thing, my Letterboxd report. um, I saw three movies within the last 24 hours. Fourth movie I saw is The Devil's Advocate. It overall, great atmosphere, has all the strengths of a 90s movie. The drawback is 90s movies required a happy ending, and it like goes on a scene too long and deserved like a meaner ending. And then also it builds so confidently throughout the movie of like the relationship between Charlize Theron and Keanu Reeves, who need to do a John Wick Atomic Blonde crossover, by the way. Um, Builds their relationship so effectively. It's very keen about the legal proceedings portion of it. And then it finally gets to the end where the devil is revealed, and it's, of course, Al Pacino. And it has absolutely nothing up its sleeve of like explanation of like why this movie exists. Of like, okay, the devil got into being a lawyer, and that makes sense because it's like writing the human code, and it makes sense that that Keanu would be his spawn because X, Y, and Z. But it crosses like so many plot lines of like, well, this if that's true, then this absolutely doesn't make sense. Why would his mother then not be aware? What makes his mother special? She's in like two scenes. She's not thought of. What's the devil's plan? Convince his son to make love to his sister so that they can have another spawn who's like more powerful, and then he's offering him more of what he already has. And it's like, okay, you're the devil and this is like your entire legacy, and that's your plan. It's pretty weak, bro. But it has a lot of good scenes, a lot of good character work throughout. But it's like, yeah, that is a limp ending. I was even thinking as I was watching it, like I'd seen the highlights um, before, so I knew it was coming. I'd heard people talk about this movie enough times because, 90s movies have their own legacies. Like Hope Floats. I've never seen that, but that like has a film legacy. Like if I say that title, that a movie. Like if I say Forces of Nature, maybe it sounds like it's been made into a lot of forgettable action movies, but that's like a Ben Affleck, Sandra Bullock rom com. But if I say like How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, that's a movie that early 2000s that you've heard of. But there's a lot of these movies, Tootsie, you know, you may have not seen the movie, but you've heard of the title. And it's like movies from the 90s, like The Devil's Advocate, are like that, where it's like they have a sense of time and place that is so keen and so specific that the quality ultimately of the movie does not matter. So uh, that's what made that movie worthy to me, was that like it had a radical sense of time and place in the 90s, good performances, good atmosphere, but kind of a terrible ending. Um, but anyways, I saw that movie a few days ago, and then I saw Rolling Thunder, which had takes place in the 70s, I think it is, yeah. Modern day at the time, co-written by Paul Schrader, an inspiration for Bill Hader when he made Barry. And it's about a guy who comes home from Vietnam, isn't the same, has struggles adjusting, and suffers an attack and goes after the people who attacked him. In that process, meets a girl, and their meet cute lasts like 5 seconds. No, it more than that. There's a few scenes, but it was like he's like, "Oh, well, I'm going to kill some people," and she's like, well, I'm working right now. Can you wait like 2 hours? And then he just bolts. She's like, what do you expect me to do? Drop everything? And she does. Stunning scene. And it made me think, like, people in the silent generation, like, which is, you know, millennials, and then you have Gen X, and then you have baby boomers, and then you have baby boomers' parents of the silent generation. It's like they just did things like that of like, okay, I'm married to this person for life now. I'm with this person. Let me just like give up my job because, job applications didn't require 3 years of work somewhere else on top of a degree. Um, which is like ridiculous how they do things now. But like people were a lot more mobile back then. So I really appreciated the time. Gave the movie 3 stars, pretty good. Um, it could have like it was overly plotted. It still felt too long at 100 minutes. But it was watchable. I liked it. Holds up pretty well for a movie from the 70s and has the same energy. There's a scene in the town where Ben Affleck goes up to Jeremy Renner and says, I need to do something. We're going to go hurt some people. You can't ever ask me about it again, but I need to know, are you in or out? And he's just like, which car are we going to take? And there's a similar scene that probably inspired it, which I'm sure Ben Affleck has seen because he would have been about the right age, where William Devane tells Tommy Lee Jones, I've found the people who hurt me. Um, I know where they live. I know where we're at. I know where we're going. And Tommy Lee Jones just says, I'm gonna go get my gear. And yeah, it's kind of a badass scene. Of course, it doesn't utilize the same set of close-ups, and it's not as fast in the editing, and their back is actually to the camera. So that's an example of improved filmmaking craft from Ben Affleck because he has a more access to a more dynamic camera system. Um, because it's like close-up, cut to Renner, cut to Affleck, cut to Renner, cut to Affleck, and it's not overall stylistic sense of place of like they're in the bedroom in Rolling Thunder when that happens. So it feels more lived in. But like for film grammar, it's like face to face to face to cut to go. Boom, 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 boom. Lasts in 5 seconds. In Rolling Thunder, it lasts like about 30 seconds. Um, it's about half the time in the town, or at least feels that way. But yeah, that was a cool scene. And again, not a very demanding movie. Um, Another movie by Paul Schrader about a guy who has trouble connecting with society, meets a girl, very pretty girl, and tries to understand him or fix him or at least understand him. And they connect, and it's about how effed up people move through life and can be redeemed in some ways, good and bad. But I like that formula. Um, it's not too bad. Um, yeah, and then I followed that up with The Land of Saints and Sinners, which is a Liam Neeson film directed by Roberto Lorenz, who worked with Clint Eastwood on Trouble with the Curve and Liam Neeson on The Marksman. Sorry, Clint Eastwood on Trouble with the Curve, which starred Justin Timberlake, Amy Adams. Wasn't very good. Glad Clint did another two more acting movies after that because that was a terrible film to go out on. That could have been great, but wasn't. Um, Need a bit more time in the oven with its screenplay because it's like a bit half baked. Um, and then would make a good remake case, Trouble with the Curve, or maybe a TV series because it's like you think it's like, oh, it got Justin Timberlake and Amy Adams and Clint Eastwood, and uh, maybe if Clint Eastwood directed it, it actually would have been better. But yeah, it's just him acting when he's not directing, and not that great. So anyways, that director did a movie, The Marksman with Liam Neeson, which was like an early pandemic movie. Um, was kind of a light hit. Liam Neeson had done a movie about it was starred the In and Out Bandit was his character's name, and it was like the Outlaw King or something. Gosh, the titles of Liam Neeson movies are just so generic, and I have to look it up because it was like a number one hit at the box office during COVID for like 2 weeks, and he started a good relationship with that film company afterwards. Okay, when I go to career, is it going to allow me to go to his filmography? Of course not. They do this sometimes, uh, which I find very annoying. Um, okay, yeah, 2017, and then it skips to 2022. Wow, that's helpful. That's very helpful. Show me the friggin' acting credits. Okay, at the bottom, Liam Neeson filmography. Here we go. Now he's done like 20 films. Like Honest Thief is what I was thinking of, by the way, because he's been in how many films this decade? One, two, documentary three, four, five, six, seven, 8, 9, 10, 11. He's done 11 films so far. No films released yet, but 11 films in 4 years. So that's quite a bit. The Marksman was the one he did in 2021. Uh, and yeah. So, anyways, uh, Robert Lorenz directs this movie, starring Liam Neeson. And it's just a Liam Neeson is a hitman. But another guy who is a hitman in this movie is Jack Gleeson, Joffrey Baratheon from Game of Thrones, who had by all means retired from acting. And then you see him here, and you're like, oh, I'm glad. I'm glad he got work because he's good in this movie. He's playing like a throwaway character, um, but he plays him well. And Kerry Condon is the villain in it. Kieran Hines is sort of like the go-between, like the fourth character, and it's just basically films the Irish countryside. Um, and yeah, he plays a guy named Finbar Murphy who wants to put his life of killing away, even though he killed somebody like 20 minutes ago. Um, and yeah, it's Liam Neeson was on a downturn. It's funny how it's credited as a Netflix film. I watched it on Amazon Prime. But yeah, came out in Venice, released just a few months ago in Ireland. Made him cool with 3 million. It's not that long, but it films the Irish countryside, uh, and it's nicely paced, well acted. That you forgive. It's extremely, extremely formulaic, but it's a unique setting. Liam Neeson is decent in it. He's doing his thing. That's fine. Kerry Condon is very good in it. Jack Gleeson is very good in it. Colm Meaney, again, doing his thing. He's been like the same guy for his entire career, going back to like as long as I've been born. And he looks the same. And Kieran Hines sort of does his thing. Is the most underwritten role, but that's fine. And it's like Tom Stern is the cinematographer, guy who works with Clint Eastwood, Robert Lorenz, the guy who worked with Clint Eastwood previously and was his co-producer forever. So these are like film veterans making a movie. And at some point, the screenplay came about, and somebody said, "We have something." Uh, so also like Robert Lawrence, who had done The Marksman with Liam Neeson, they're more comfortable. They had a hit before, but it was a hit that like wasn't particularly great because The Marksman was about a guy who picks up like a family at the border and feels a lot like Witness, and he's just supposed to take them from A to B, and ends up going on the run and whatnot. This is very similar to that, but it's just the countryside is just of Ireland is really nice to see, taking place in like the 50s or something. The Troubles, actually. So that is um 60s to wow the 90s. So it takes place in the 60s of Northern Ireland. So it's a Liam Neeson in his habitat. So it feels a bit more honest. And I liked it. 3-star movie. And again, I like seeing Jack Gleeson. Um, he's 32 actually. He's 1 year older than me. And I like seeing him show up here. It's worth watching for him alone just to get to see him because you're reminded, oh, somebody from Game of Thrones we haven't evaluated in a while. Here he shows up here and he's great. And it's funny, Carrie Condon is like early 40s, and she says to Jack Gleason, like, aren't you a bit young for me? It's like Jack Gleason's haircut makes him look so old because he has like that long mushroom cut. Um, but he still has that young face. And then Carrie Condon has a very angular face, so she looks older. Um, but she's still relatively young, and she's a newcomer to me because she was just in Banshees of Inisherin. So it's like she's playing the villain. She has something to prove. Jack Gleason is like first major role that I've seen him in since Game of Thrones. He has something to prove. And then Kieran Hines, professional. Liam Neeson, done this a million times. Um, the director kind of needs the work, but is also like a professional. And then you have him working with the same cinematographer in a good setting. It's enough of a balance of like comfort, but it's like when you're given an easy project that you know you can kind of knock out of the park. So you're comfortable, but you push yourself a little. That's this movie. 3-star film. I liked it. And then I followed that up with Knockaround Guys, which I just saw today. Stars Seth Green, Vin Diesel, reminding you how he used to be tough. Seth Green, by the way, doing the most amount of acting he's ever done. And good for him. He does it pretty well. Never got any praise, so he just went back to being himself. Although now, if you see him on a podcast talking about Family Guy, he sounds like Christopher Walken for some reason. So somebody get to the bottom of why Seth Green sounds like Christopher Walken. I'd really much appreciate that. But it stars Barry Pepper, and they're all buddies. They're the son, or rather, Pepper is the son of Dennis Hopper, rest in peace, who is a mob boss, and they do a drop because Barry Pepper wants to make big time, even though he lacks the stomach for it. Um, he's trained under John Malkovich, who runs the mob area of like New Jersey or something. Anyway, they do a drop, and the problem is that at the airport, Seth Green charters his own plane, and during the drop off of refueling, he doesn't let the bag out of his sight. He carries the bag with him, but he notices cops eyeballing him, so he has to stash the bag. The bag gets put on a plane that goes to Dakota, one of the Dakotas, South Dakota. So to get the bag back, Vin Diesel, Barry Pepper, Seth Green, and another guy all go back to the small town and, you know, sort of try and run it, but deal with the local cops and try and get the money in the bag back because it's necessary for the Barry Pepper's father, who's being squeezed by, his gang rivals. And after a while, John Malkovich shows up and does his weird thing. Famously terrible at accents, by the way. And his hair pieces are always terrible. The one thing that you can always count on John Malkovich, his hair pieces are terrible and his accents are terrible, but he is always interesting to see. So Brian Koppelman co-wrote and co-directed this film, and it follows the basics pretty well. It's cast pretty well. There's a decent scene where um, Vin Diesel talks to this one guy the same guy who plays Wayne Grow. Um, shoot, hope that wasn't too not loud enough. And I don't know what's making that sound. Is that just the cord here? No, it's not. Is it my arm? Is it the chair? It might be the chair making that sound. But anyways, um, they go to the Dakotas, get the money back, and Brian Koppelman, follows a formula pretty rigidly. It doesn't leverage the character relationships enough and doesn't have the sense of place that I talked about in Devil's Advocate and many other good films in the Land of Saints and Sinners. Doesn't leverage any of that, but it has a good cast. It has that basic 2000s craft. The actors all want something to prove, so it's well performed, but it's just kind of like you watch it and you're like, they're, it lacks a direction for the characters. And, people's criticism of Jeff Nichols earlier of like he's a 3.5 star film director. It's like, well, Brian Koppelman is a 2.5 star film director. So, that's the insult that I would use for him. It's like somebody who has all the pieces every time to make a good film and makes like a Netflix quality film. And I mean Netflix not in the sense of Netflix original film because it's better than that. But Netflix film in the sense that it's a movie that Netflix licensed from, Universal or whoever. Um, and that's the film that was made. Like Knockaround Guys, I remember came out. A buddy of mine really liked it. um, David Levin, by the way, or Levian was the other director of it. Nolan Spender produced it. That's probably the most amount of attitude. Clint Mansell did the music for it. And it's only like 92 minutes, 15 million budget. New Line Cinema distributed it. So it this movie, I'm trying to think. Yeah, 21%, well acted, too derivative. Totally agree. 30 out of 100 on Metacritic. It's a bit harsh. Um, but I want to find out if I can find out how much it made. Like, I know it made 15 million, but I want to see what it opened to at the box office. So, and I find the title funny because it sounds like a comedy. But, like, yeah, it made 11 million according to Box Office Mojo. So the results differ. But basically, opened 5 million, number 9 at the box office. Um, to let you know, is that yeah, that's the laws of attraction. So, like, that weekend, by the way, in 2002, Red Dragon and Sweet Home Alabama were both, like, killing it at the box office. And then Brown Sugar, which I saw at a secondhand store today and decided not to get because no, my buddy Nate actually had that a DVD copy of it. Maybe I should get that. It's a Fox Searchlight movie. Anyway, Brown Sugar, The Transporter open, White Oleander, Tuck Everlasting, and then Knockaround Guys. Those movies all open, all in wide release. Um, the transporter of that is like the most famous of the ones that opened. But what a rich time. Um, but anyway, those were the movies that I saw on Letterboxd. So I'm back on the kick. 3 movies within 24 hours: Rolling Thunder, In the Land of Saints and Sinners, and Knockaround Guys. And then also The Devil's Advocate. Um, good stuff. Um, anyways, moving on. Um, I wanted to mention House of the Dragon because I watched episode 2 of season 2, and keep in mind we're in the era of 2 years between seasons for a show that I don't even particularly like. The reason I don't like the show is that at the end or towards the end of the first season, sub like tertiary character has the chance to kill the bad guys on the show and instead gives a stern look and doesn't kill them, even though killing them would solve all their problems. They have motivation to kill them, and it would benefit them immensely. The problem is that it would solve the conflict. There would be no more of a TV show. But ever since then, I've found the show is like a bit of a cop out, and I've kept watching because A, there's nothing else on, and B, I'm hoping that because it was so important to Warner Brothers and HBO that they might, work extra hard to make it very good. But as the episode that I saw today, which features a sword fight between twins who they can't tell the difference between, and we can't tell the difference between, and it doesn't even end up mattering because the two characters who are fighting, I have absolutely no uh, attention to, don't know who they are, don't have any background. The people who write and review this stuff will know these characters inexplicably and have detailed performances, backgrounds, plot synopses on like who these characters are. But I was watching this and it takes off from last week's episode where a little boy dies and I know that he belongs to a certain family. I have no idea what the family member, like, is it a grandson? Is it a nephew? I don't know who I'm looking at. It's not very well explained, and I know who these people are, but I don't know what they're specifically talking about, and I'm paying attention. And it was a bit that way on Game of Thrones, but the thing is, by the time things happened on Game of Thrones, by the time something actually sizably important happened, you knew who everybody is and you wanted to know who they are. On this, it's like things happen and it just feels like a loose, faint echo of Game of Thrones, of like they're trying to do it again. But it it's a prequel, so you know it's all irrelevant. It's the House of the Dragons, the house that burns down, that like eventually they all die, and then Daenerys Targaryen and her brother flee, and the brother eventually dies. And then Daenerys Targaryen assembles an army, goes overseas, and then dies immediately by Jon Snow, who is also a Targaryen. That's why I'm only interested in a Jon Snow sequel series, because the only way to be more interesting is to move forward, not look back. So I have no interest in a show with a preordained ending, even unless it's excellent. And the show, in its first season, flirted with being excellent, but um, in the second season, there has to be a bit of cost cutting. Always, and usually that starts in the writer's room, and so the writing isn't as good. And although I will say this episode was written by Claire Kilner, um, who wrote The Wedding Date, a favorite of my mother's, and has done a number of TV. Um, so maybe that's worth saying. Also worth saying is that House of the Dragon season 1 had 10 episodes and this has 8. So again, we're waiting 2 years for 8 episodes. Claire Kilner, sorry, directed it, who also directed The Wedding Date, and I get her confused with Dana Fox, who wrote it and also wrote a bit of TV. The writer of this episode is Sarah Hess. She worked on House and Orange is the New Black. Um, she was a writer for Deadwood. Um, she's been active for about 20 years. But and has an overall deal with HBO. Yeah, good for her. So, I mean, she knows his stuff, but she's working with a loser here because House of the Dragon just sucks. Nothing else to watch. I'll keep watching this season. We're already paying for HBO. Maybe we'll see some cool dragon action, but like, I'm not interested in the plot. I don't like any of the characters. I don't like any of the characters because it's all. I agree, it has to partly be, but there's like far too much incest. But then they also want to. They're like, well, Game of Thrones was too white, so we need to introduce more black people. So they have black people who are also Targaryens. Um, which just like doesn't quite work. And then also their wigs aren't very good because wigs get pretty bad um, on shows now for some reason. Um, so yeah, that's not good. And then the show overall isn't good. So yeah, not a good show. That's what I'll say. I won't dwell on it more. Um, Wow, there is one political thought that I left off that I'll end off on here. So sorry to people who don't like politics, but it comes back to the Trump Biden thing of like false equivalency of like CNN is going to have a debate, and then they're going to have one person come in and say, Trump was terrible, and then they're going to have one person come in and say Biden is terrible, which even if you agree with like what whoever is saying. It's just so annoying how both predictable it is, and B, it's like, well, they're paid by people to say this, so they don't have their thoughts are not their own. But the sameness of that aside, the relative moral equivalency that people are saying um, drives me nuts because there's this girl who worked as an IGN host, Alana Pierce, who was the host of the IGN's Daily Fix, and that's an example of a gamer because she went from that, and she's also a video game writer in the industry, like writes plots and stuff for video games. And yeah, she has like half a million followers. Actor, host, content creator, writing, design team at Sony Santa Monica. Mostly tweet bad jokes. This is not a bad joke. She seems quite serious about it, but she's like, just cannot believe the 2024 election is down to the same two dudes as the 2020 election, except that they both got like more evil. And like, Trump is evil. He is the only US president in history to be convicted of a crime. Just think about that for a second and all the evil stuff that is being done. And it's like Trump was the only one to get caught, which should let you know how much of an idiot he is. But to like say that Joe Biden got like more evil when like the most evil thing that he did before was uh he received flack for his treatment of Anita Hill during the Clarence Thomas review. Clarence Thomas ended up being elected to the Supreme Court, where he still is, unfortunately. And the highest law in the land, judges making all of the decisions at the high executive, high level. Um, they flip and turn, laws and that kind of thing, vote on stuff, important stuff. The Supreme Court is a big deal. Anyway, Joe Biden was the head of one of the commissions to like review this case, where when Clarence Thomas was being confirmed as a judge to this land, this woman named Anita Hill accused him of sexual harassment. Although the thing was that Anita Hill worked with Clarence Thomas and also followed him to the Supreme Court, working with him there too. She clerked with him and then also followed him years later to, working for the land. And Joe Biden just basically didn't treat her super well. And we know now, post Me Too and stuff, that like she was in a position where she basically would have had to tank her entire career that she was building towards in order to speak up and like do the right thing. And there was just like no benefit of her to do that. So she received flack and wasn't really believed by Joe Biden, who for some reason was the guy in charge that they decided to put in charge of this commission to investigate the Supreme Court ruler. Really, there was too much of a stink on Clarence Thomas, and because of that, they shouldn't have elected him to the Supreme Court. But uh, several decades and many bribes later, here he is, and he is like the worst member of the Supreme Court still alive. So thank you for that, Clarence Thomas. But hey, not my country. Anyway, the worst thing Joe Biden did previously that I could think of was that professionally, that like he doesn't have the best track record on women. Granted, he's not like Trump where he has 50 or more women accusing him. He has less than 50, maybe 5 to 10. I mean, granted, they're both old, rich, powerful white men. So, um, by that measure, you can take a lot of advantage of people when you're in those positions. Um, so, Joe Biden does have, you know, some darkness to him. And the thing that one far right guy at a rally brought up on TikTok was that like Joe Biden showers with his daughter. And I'm like, well, that's kind of an insane thing to say. Where the frig does that come from? And then I like Google typed it in, and there is some semblance of it. And it turns out that uh, this is kind of like a funny note to end on. Um, Joe Biden's daughter, who's like 40 something now, um, had her diary stolen decades ago. She wrote in it as a kid, as like a teenager and a late teen, and it got stolen, and then somebody tried to sell it, which is illegal because you can't sell stolen property. You can never profit off a crime. Anyway, they sold her diary, which included private entries and stuff. Um, and as a result, that got put online, And one questionable thing about Joe Biden that it says is that his daughter, Ashley, writes, and this was just published online a year ago. Like, this is a pretty fresh new case. Um, Ashley says, I remember taking showers with my father, in brackets, not really appropriate, like as a kid. And it makes me think of the Michael Scott quote of um, my coworkers are like my children or whatever, or his subordinates are like children, his employees are like children. And the analogy that Michael Scott uses is like, I guess it just gets to a point where daddy can't take a bath with his kids anymore. And he's like, so in that way, I can't take a bath with Pam, even though I would really want to. And then it just cuts to Pam, and he's like, he said what? Uh, so it's like that's the Joe Biden analogy of like, um, he did that thing of like that sounds like something that like the super old parent would do, or I don't know. I'm not a parent, but like that's basically used as fodder for the far right of like Joe Biden is crazy because he does this, or Joe Biden is creepy because he does this. And let's not pretend that Joe Biden wasn't creepy before. He is very creepy. Um, and the only reason he's not seen as creepy is because he's kind of like he's got that creepy old man guy who thinks he still has it but has no idea how unappealing he is that he's running against a rapist. Um, and Donald Trump is a rapist. The only reason he's not a convicted rapist is because the rape law against marital rape did not exist in the 90s when his wife, Marla Maples, accused him of rape because basically he had to get surgery on his scalp. The surgeon messed up and scarred him, which is part of the reason why he wears his hair the way that he does. And he came back to his wife and he's like, hey, the surgeon you recommended effed up my hairline. Uh, F you. And then he like assaulted her. Um, and she had to basically retract those words in court, speaking that was more metaphorical, even though that she had written so much in her own autobiography that he had sexually assaulted her. Um, it was enough that I read it. I'm like, I believe it. But again, she had to retract and said, well, I meant it more metaphorically because I'm being sued now and this and that. And that doesn't get into the several women like who have just told the same story again and again of like Donald Trump sexually assaulted me, Donald Trump sexually assaulted me, and they all happen sort of in the same way. Um, that's an MO. Anyways, when you're dealing with one person who has 50 or so, complaints like that against him, and a guy who has like 10 to 12, um, I'm not saying that those 10 to 12 are okay in any way, but can we bring back a sense of moral relativism? Because, like, in terms of the personalists, that's like the most evil thing about them. Professionally, and this is how I interpreted the tweet first, was that if you want to say that Joe Biden is evil, the easiest argument you can make is like, well, the United States' role in helping Israel kill Palestinians. And the thing is that today or yesterday, um, Benjamin Netanyahu, the current prime minister of Israel, went public on the offensive on his one ally, who is the United States, for not delivering them weapons. And the reason that Joe Biden isn't help delivering weapons to Benjamin Netanyahu to fight Hamas is because it has sort of been revealed or is being investigated, so it's known in all ways, but proof that basically Netanyahu, who doesn't care, um, has used weapons given to him by the U.S. To murder innocent people um, who happen to be Palestinians. Um, Not all Palestinians are Hamas, the terrorist organization, but in his fight, Netanyahu's fight against Hamas, he has used American weaponry to kill innocent people. And if Joe Biden were to know that that is being the case, that weapons are being used to kill innocent people, and then supplied those weapons to Netanyahu, that would be a war crime. My position is that the whole idea of Israel created in 1948 um, as basically a response to World War II, um, and the Germans meeting with Americans and the rest of the world and kind of being like, okay, but what do we really do with all these Jewish people? It we wouldn't have had to do the bad stuff we did if they had an actual place for themselves. So let's create one, and thus that was the response. And the original sins of World War II get carried forward. Um, I think that you could then basically take any U.S. president post the creation of Israel and how they've helped it with the intention of there being a democracy and thus theoretically stability when really it causes anything but in the Middle East. You could basically charge any U.S. president with being evil. Because they're facilitating war crimes. Because ever since the creation of Israel, um, and honestly, long before then, they just slapped a label on it. Um, there have been, you know, people who have used the weaponry supplied by America to kill innocent people. But you could also say that worldwide because, gun issues mainly stem from weapons smuggled out of and made from the United States of America to be used on people not from the United States of America. So, you know, it's a crazy world we live in. But yeah, going back to Alana Pierce, I just reject the moral equivalency of Trump and Biden. Biden's a bad guy, you could say, um, an unremarkable politician, but he's placed against the worst politician of all time, like one of the worst presidents in U.S. history. Do you know how bad you have to be as a U.S. president to, um, to be the worst of all time? You have to be pretty bad. Um, and I was just kind of like, I'm not popular enough on Twitter to talk about it, but one guy named Gray Falcon OW, who I do not know is a real person because what is their picture? It's a graphic. It's not of a famous person. It's just of some kind of symbol that they made up. Their description says, I'm that forums guy with more posts than anyone else for Overwatch. I'd like to think occasionally I have some pretty good ideas. Now, he has 531 followers. I do not often follow people with less than 1,000. It's just something that I've started doing. But this guy made such a good point that I'm like, I'm going to follow him. So this is what he says. It could very well be a bot, keep in mind. I don't know if this is actually a real person. And they could be hired by the deep state. They could be working for the Biden administration and stuff. But the sources they use are solid. And I'll just say this. And again, I don't mean to turn this into vote blue bull crap, for the US and stuff. I'm not from there. Feel free to toss all my political musings in the trash. And again, I'm sorry to turn a film and video game podcast into something like this. It's just following my train of thought. But this guy makes a good point, whoever he is. And he says this. Well, I fully invite you to reconsider the equivalency of Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Biden has flaws for sure. Trump is asking for a verbatim, literal dictatorship, saying he has the right to assassinate political opponents, having his Secretary of Defense acting batshit insane to out crazy him away from multiple nuclear wars, and referencing his party as the new face of Nazism. And he refers to an article in The Hill, Business Insider, and Associated Press News. On Gaza, Trump is encouraging Netanyahu to just carpet bomb both the Gaza Strip and West Bank to get it over with. That's from Rolling Stone, of all places, and sounds like just something that Trump would say to get something over with that is a serious, important, complicated issue. Um, he takes problems that require scalpels and uses a sledgehammer. That's me just saying that, by the way. On Gaza, Trump is, yeah, I mentioned that. And it's not just one defense secretary saying that they had to go out of their way to prevent Trump from getting trigger happy with nukes. It is all five of them, referencing a CNN article. On January 6th, Trump blocked all called going in and out to the National Guard using the brother of the guy he pardoned for treason and the guy he appointed 6 days after the election. Um, this guy is referencing his own tweet on that, so I'm not sure about that. And the way that it's written, it's a poorly written tweet, so we can strike that from the record because then he refers to in more detail Esquire, Defense.gov, Associated Press, CNN, Citizens for Ethics.org, USA Today, and Business Insider. So all good stuff, but I just find it too deep to get into. So we'll strike that from the record. Trump had full knowledge of the lethality and infection potential of COVID being way more virulent and deadly than the flu, and lied about it. And after being recorded on tape saying he would lie about it. The numbers listed in the video are the COVID infection rate versus the flu infection rates, and I know this because I was looking at those at the time. This refers to YouTube, not a serious source, but Trump's handling of COVID very much annoys me because it was a lot worse because of how he handled it, despite the fact that he wanted to come out with the cure. So he pushed really hard on the cure getting made, and he is so stupid that his people rejected the cure that he came up with, that he used and said was fine. But they're like, no, it's bad. And he just kind of rolled with it. And that's why he's not a good leader. Not only did Trump lie about COVID, researchers looked through 38 million articles of COVID misinformation, and Trump was the biggest source of all that. That's a famous New York Times article, leading to over 300,000 preventable deaths. That's the NPR news. Or after Trump tweeted that Pence was in the building, here's security camera footage. We can see that lynch mob, not really a lynch mob, just flock of sheep, really, I would attribute them to, with a couple of rabble rousers that wanted to make a scene, was within 30 seconds of probably assassinating the vice president and 20 plus senators. And it was only dumb luck and quick thinking that it was avoided. Watch for yourself. We were literally 30 seconds away from a literal dictatorship. First of all, no, because um, Trump was still like, if it's all very technical, but yeah, if Mike Pence gets assassinated, um, and the peaceful transfer of power doesn't like happen in that regard officially, like that's very ceremonial, it's still probably would have switched, but I don't know. That's kind of like an interesting thought, but it's like YouTube video, which I won't get into. And it says, and we're 23 weeks until doing it again on November 2nd. Now, I've said before, and I'll say it again, in 2020, um, Joe Biden beat Donald Trump by 10 million votes. And it shows that, like, when sane people go out and vote, the crazies are outnumbered. Um, I don't think people are crazy for voting for Trump. Some people just, like, fundamentally disagree with Biden, and the binary system that the US has leads to extremism such as this. It's just a natural outcome. So That's what we have. And then he says, that said, if you've gotten down this far, here's a video that fully describes the full depravity of right-wing regressive social politics. That's a good way of naming it. In the form of a sarcastic George Carlin-style rant. So that's interesting. Let's see if this will come out. Uh, oh, no, never mind. Because I thought it would lead directly to like George Carlin's stand-up, but it leads to a guy with 190,000 subscribers named Steve Shives, and it involves the title "Said the Quiet Part Loud," which is just such a lib thing to say that I don't like it. I'm sorry. It's like, I know that I fancy myself a left-winger, but that's even too left-wing for me. They said the quiet part loud. It's like nobody gives a, you know? So yeah, that is my movie and box office blog for the week. Ends in a political rant, which I fully believe will not make a difference on like how people think. Even though I've been told many times by my friends of like, you said this and it affected me, and I'm like, oh, okay, great. It's usually when you're not paying attention. Nothing I will say will or should completely rock your world politically or make you change your mind or do something. What it should do is like make you think and think like, oh, I better go try that out. I better go think about that. I better go look this up to make sure, you know. Um, a lot of times, when you get hunkered down in a debate, which is, a sub theme of this week, you tend to go back and recheck your sources and see if you read them correctly. And sometimes you annoyingly find out, like, I meant X and not Y. Crap. How do I reformat my opinion to have it make sense? That's really what I want you to do with this blog. Again, sorry for being political. I prefer not to be political when I can. I love politics. I'm open to things. Um, I love having political discussions. Um, but yeah, next week, A Quiet Place Day 1 arrives, and I'll review that. Also, probably mention more about Kinds of Kindness, which made 70,000 per theater in 5 theaters. Although I wonder how much of that was recorded from the local screening room, which had a very impressive showing of Kinds of Kindness there. Now, that movie was scheduled to open on the 21st and did, but only opened in 5 theaters, but somehow snuck a showing in Kingston, Ontario, Canada, when most was playing in, LA, New York, um, and Chicago, uh, probably Florida. Um, yeah, so Kingston, Ontario is sneaking in there. Good for you. Um, Love what they're doing down there at the screening room in Kingston. Um, it's the best limited opening of 2024. Um, yeah. Uh, so take care. Bye bye then, and thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Film Gamer podcast.